Hey guys, tonight we are going back to the rolling decks of the Caribbean in the early 1700s, a time when cannon smoke clung to the moonlit air and a battered eye patch could hide more than lost sight. Before you get comfortable, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps small creators like us keep bringing you more calming history to help with sleep. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. It's always fascinating to see this sleepy little community come together from all over the world. Now, dim the lights, slow your breathing, and relax your body as we drift into a world where sea spray mingles with tar and rum, and makeshift medicine stands between life and lingering agony. The lanterns sway gently above the main deck, their faint glow spilling across coils of hemp and dark pools of water. Below, in the cramped hold that doubles as the surgeon's sickbed, a rough-hewn table is slick with brine and blood. Wooden ribs of the hull creak like tired lungs, and every groan of the ship reminds the wounded that mercy and weather are equally fickle. Here, the night smells of damp oak and saltbutt, also of iron and fear, the unmistakable scent of fresh injury that has permeated every plank. The man responsible for tending these hurts is no polished physician. He is the ship's barber surgeon, a jack of all trades whose qualifications may include a stint as a dockside hair cutter or a battlefield bone saw. His tools bone-handled knives, a small brass syringe, a jar of leeches, and a broad-toothed serratle in their chest with each swell. Wrapped in oiled cloth lies a dingy copy of S. Treatise, pages blotched by salt, a talisman of book-learned respectability amid improvisation and prayer. Wounds come in waves. Splintered wood, driven deep by chain-shot rope, burns that blister and weep, and the slow, dull ache of scurvy-loosened gums. Yet perhaps more feared than any cannonball is infection, the silent tide that steals even the toughest buccaneer after the cheers of victory fade. Without knowledge of microbes, the surgeon trusts instead to smoke-blackened cautery irons, boiling pitch, and sheer nerve. The hiss when hot metal meets flesh echoes louder in memory than any broadside. Pain relief is, at best, brutal kindness. A leather-bitten strap between the teeth, a ladle of overproof rum, maybe a draught of laudanum, if luck or plundered apothecary bottles allow. Sometimes the surgeon crushes dried clove and wormwood, steeping them in a pewter mug of tepid water to numb nerves and mask rot. Other times, a companion holds the patient's gaze, murmuring a sea shanty's refrain's soft-spoken words meant as much for sleep aid as for courage. Amputation, though dreaded, is swift. 2 assistants pin the victim. The surgeon marks the cut with a soot-tipped finger, then drives the saw in practiced strokes, finishing before the 3rd verse of Spanish Ladies. Bleeding vessels are seized with heated tongs or tied off with catgut. The stump is plunged into a barrel of briny water, then smeared with tar, sealing tissue beneath a crust of fire-hardened pitch. Minutes later, the deckhand is half-dragged, half-carried to a hammock, left to pray fever spares him. Dental torment stalks every pirate. Hardtack cracks molars. Grog feeds decay. Extraction is the single reliable cure. The surgeon grips a tooth key, twists and wrenches as though hauling stubborn cargo from the deep. Sockets are stuffed with oakum, soaked in clove oil, the taste of spice and salt, a bitter reminder of survival. Some swear by rinses of seawater and rum. Others clutch lucky coins against swollen cheeks, bargaining with gods old and new. Few maladies spread faster than the French pox mercury salves rubbed into sores until gums blacken and Painful urethral injections of turpentine are common torments, their cures nearly as fatal as the disease. Still, the promise of another night ashore lures crewmen back to the surgeon's bench again and again, each time with quieter shame and louder groans. The gentle hush of the tide offers little comfort when bones ache with poison. Fresh water is precious, so wounds are sometimes cleansed with stale beer, or, in desperate hours, urine thought sterile by folk wisdom. Surprisingly, the most effective aid may be maggots harvested from gut-rotted meat, placed upon a gangrenous gash. They feast only on dead tissue, leaving behind pink, cleaner flesh. The surgeon watches with grim fascination, mindful that nature's tiny scavengers outperform his own blades. And so our voyage into pirate medicine begins an uneasy dance of superstition, courage, and crude innovation performed on planks slick with seawater. In the chapters ahead, we'll trace how Caribbean herbs soothed fever, why broken hearts and broken bones alike met the same splint of rough-cut timber, and how spiritual charms dangled beside scalpels in the surgeon's chest. For now, let the waves rock you, gentle and rhythmic, as lantern light dims and the scent of pitch fades, carrying you toward sleep, and toward the next tale carved in salt and blood upon the endless sea. The trade winds sigh across warm, moonlit harbors, and in their hush the pirate surgeon wanders through the spice-scented stalls of Port Royal, Kingston, or Tortuga, pockets jangling with captured coin. Lanterns paint buttery halos over baskets of glistening limes, coils of cinnamon, and bundles of emerald leaves bound in raffia. Each vendor claims a remedy rarer than the last, and the soft-spoken haggling drifts like lullaby over broken coral streets. Tonight's shopping is more than commerce. It is quiet, breathing insurance against the next broadside. Powder for poultices, bark to brew calming sleep aids, and fragrant resins that promise to still shivering fevers all vanish into burlap sacks while indigo shadows lengthen. A gentle narrator's voice might tell you the scene is serene, but beneath the surface there is urgent alchemy. Every herb purchased now could be the difference between life and the long, dim silence of the sea. Back aboard the ship, the surgeon unpacks his apothecary chest with reverent care. The box is oak, scarred by blade marks and patched with brass, its interior fitted with tiny drawers lined in beeswaxed linen. Glass phials clink softly, apricot-hued powder of guaiacum next to coils of dried serpent root. In a corner nests a leather notebook pages, swollen by salt sprayware. Cures in crabbed ink share margins with sketches of vines and blossoms. He sets out pewter mortar, pestles, and a hand-turned press meant for extracting thick green oils. The deck rocks like a cradle underfoot, and each creak of timber is answered by the muffled heartbeat of ocean. In this swaying laboratory, chemistry becomes lullaby, the surgeon's steady motions, a metronome soothing anxious ears, eager for sleep-friendly narration. The Caribbean provided bounty enough to challenge any London dispensary. Guaiacum wood, called the holy tree, was rasped into shavings, then simmered until the broth turned ruddy and bitter. Pirates swore it purged rotten humors, easing arthritis earned from crouching behind cannons. Columba root from Hispaniola, ground to a pale dust, became a dependable tonic for seasickness when stirred into watered-down rum. Meanwhile, sassafras, bark sharp and citrusy, was infused as a soft tea that calmed jangling nerves before night watches. The surgeon learned that a few drops of tamarind pulp dissolved in vinegar cooled raging fevers faster than bloodletting. and a smear of aloe gel soothed rope burns without the fire of cautery irons. Listeners drifting in their bunks might imagine the lazy burble of these remedies steeping, a sound meant to help with sleep, even as it promised waking comfort for wounded men. Scurvy, the silent thief of gums and vigor, haunted every voyage, but tropical fruit fought back with bright vengeance. Oranges, pilfered from Spanish groves, were sliced into quarters and packed in casks of lightly salted water, ready for the surgeon to dole out at the first sign of spongy bleeding. Limes, cheaper and more plentiful, lent their sharp scent to daily grog rations, a practice that filled the night air with a refreshing temps cutting through tar and fishy bilge. Sometimes he dried thin wheels of lemon peel on the galley stove, grinding the brittle rind into a powdery seasoning he sprinkled over hardtack. The taste was brisk, almost celebratory, and the crew came to accept that this tart ritual, paired with soft-spoken reminders to chew slowly, might spare them the locking jaws of death. For sleepless sailors, the simple act of sipping citrus water beneath the stars became a bedtime routine, as calming as any lullaby. Yet not every cure was European in origin. Many arrived courtesy of Arawak and healers whose knowledge predated the first crossbarred sail. From them, the surgeon learned to steep fever grass later, called lemongrass, into a steam that cleared phlegmy lungs, and to wrap crushed noni leaves around festering cuts to draw out pus. He paid in trade beads or Portuguese cloth, but more often in humble attention, standing quiet while elders recited plant names soft as wind through sugarcane. Back on deck, he repeated their words, kashabu, anamuas, a whispered chant, preserving the syllables like spells. Those nighttime pronunciations, drifting over hammocks, carried a subtle promise. The world contained secrets deeper than any map, and learning them could rock a soul toward inner stillness. Storage aboard a pirate vessel demanded cunning. Delicate blossoms wilted under tropical heat unless sealed in wax-capped jars with a kiss of brandy, while powdered barks kept best in goatskin pouches hung high from the quarterdeck rafters, away from damp. The surgeon improvised cedar racks near the galley chimney, letting low warmth turn sticky sap into amber beads that could be sliced off and melted into salves. During calm nights, he inspected each specimen by lamplight, humming a soft shanty to steady his hands. His narration so gentle that wounded sailors in the sick hammocks often surrendered to sleep before he finished cataloging. Even the sigh of the catalog pages, turning like wings, added its own hush to the lull. Some mixtures were brewed solely to silence the mind. Passion flower petals, collected where vines strangled abandoned forts, dried into curled lilac ribbons, steeped in boiling water and tempered with a sliver of honeycomb. They produced a mild sedative that smoothed frayed tempers after brawls. Opium poppies raided from Dutch Java cargoes were risky riches. The surgeon shaved black gum into droplets no larger than pinheads, dissolving them in arrack for grievous fractures or phantom limb throbs. Administered gently, these draughts dimmed the clang of memories and cannon in equal measure, granting even hardened buccaneers a few hours of dreamless, restorative drift. Listeners tonight may notice how swiftly the hush of poppy-sweet air settles, the perfect sleep aid carried on our narrative tide. Superstition walked hand in hand with science along these decks. A dried shark tooth dangled over the medicine chest to bite infection away, and vials were stoppered with corks etched with small crosses to seal in virtue. The surgeon kept a polished cowrie shell inside the box lid, claiming its pearly glow would reflect evil spirits like a mirror. Yet, for every charm, there was a practical twin. Spiderweb compresses, stiffened with rum, stopped bleeding, and thin strings of fermented plantain fiber, tied around swollen wrists, reduced inflammation. The crew accepted both approaches without fuss. In the creaking dark, hope tasted the same whether served as prayer or powdered leaf. That fusion of faith and flora wins through our own storytelling voice, weaving reassurance into each soft syllable. One sweltering dawn, the boatswain staggered below with ague shaking his spine. The surgeon laid him on a sling canvas, fanning the air with a palm frond, while brewing a tisane of bitter cinchona bark and grated ginger. He cooled the man's forehead with seawater-soaked linen, then dripped the steaming liquid between rattling teeth. Hour after hour, he pressed a compress of crushed guava leaves to the boatswain's pulse points, coaxing the fever down in patient increments. By dusk, the tremors eased, replaced by exhausted stillness. Crewmen gathered outside the sick-bay door, silent as children, catching the slow cadence of the surgeon's whispered counts, 1 breath in, 2 breaths out, an impromptu meditation that soothed both patient and onlookers. That day, lesson and lullaby were one and the same. Medicine could be measured not just in ounces and draughts, but in the calming rhythm of careful presence. As night grows deeper, the surgeon curls beside his chest, quills scratching new notes, dosages tested, failures admitted, small triumphs preserved like pressed blossoms. Overhead, the rigging hums in low harmony with breaking waves. Somewhere a lookout yawns, comforted by the faint herbal aroma lingering from deck to mast. And you, reclining now in your own quiet harbor, may feel the story's gentle pull. Let your breathing mirror the slow rocking of that distant ship. Let the soft-spoken narration guide your mind toward weightless drift. In our next chapter, we will explore the brutal art of battlefield triage amid roaring broadsides, yet always through a veil of warmth and calm designed to help with sleep. Until then, surrender to the hush of indigo seas and the subtle perfume of island cures, knowing that the apothecary's lamp will keep watch long after your eyes close. The pale glow of pre-dawn has barely tinted the eastern horizon when the first cannon thunders. Its breath rolls across the deck like a waking giant. And in that single concussion, the surgeon's quiet sickbay transforms into a crucible of decision. Splinters fly with shrill whistles, burying themselves in rope and flesh alike, and the air fills with the hot metal temps of fresh smoke. Yet even as chaos rips across the planks, the surgeon's voice stays low and even calming, soft-spoken, a metronome guiding frantic hands. He moves with deliberate slowness that feels almost like defiance, pausing between heartbeats to note which groans rise sharpest, which gashes pump darkest. In those crucial heartbeats that stretch into eternity, triage is less a science than an instinctual dance. Choose who may be saved, who will be eased, and who must be left to the mercy of prayer and seawater. He divides the maimed into 3 crude bands marked by scraps of sailcloth. Crimson for those needing immediate blade and needle. Indigo for the wounded who can wait. Plain canvas for the souls beyond mortal help. A deckhand with powder-blackened cheeks mans the entry ladder, whispering each color to passing mates, his lips trembling, but his voice steady as a bedtime chant. Those draped in crimson are borne first into the flickering lantern light, bodies slick with brine and blood. The surgeon's assistants soften the cook's mate, and a nimble cabin boy bind tourniquets of tarred hemp just above spurting stumps, their fingers slipping but sure. Sinews tighten like rigging under storm strain, and pulses fade from frantic drumming to a faint, manageable patter. All the while, outside the open gun port, another volley rattles the hull. But inside the sickbed narration, the surgeon counts breaths aloud. In 2, 3, out, turning carnage into a cadence meant to help with sleep, even as the deck groans beneath cannon recoil. On a thick oak barrel, he lays out his instruments, the wood vibrating with each broadside like a distant drum, the saw still crusted in pitch from last week's amputation. Glints beside curved needles, threaded with catgut, a bone elevator, and a pewter basin half filled with spirits. He glances at each tool the way a minstrel might check the tuning of a lute string, then nods once and gestures for the first crimson-marked patient. A young gunner, thigh gashed by flying chain shot, clamps down on a leather strap, while hot iron kisses severed vessels shut. The smell-burned hair, scorched meat should curdle stomachs, yet the surgeon murmurs a rolling lullaby learned from a Saint-Domingue midwife. Doucement, doucement, la mer berce les âmes. Gentle, gentle, the sea cradles souls. The words float upward, blending with gunpowder haze, and for a moment the boy's eyes soften, his grip loosens, and pain subsides beneath the hypnotic hum of care. Those of the indigo band wait, propped against the hold's curved hull, swaying with the ship as though already lulled toward slumber. One clutches a crimson's plaited hat, still feathered with rococo pride. Another strokes a chipped locket, lips tracing silent prayers in Portuguese. The surgeon stops before each, pressing fingers to wrists, noting temperature and the sheen of sweat. Then scribbles symbols in his weather-stained ledger. Small circles for shrapnel yet embedded, triangles for suspected fractures, crescents for those who must soon shift from indigo to crimson if swelling marches unchecked. He tears thin cedar shavings from a pouch and asks the cook's mate to brew them in boiling rum, their resinous aroma drifting like forest incense down damp corridors. The resulting draught is earthy, bittersweet, and, taken in slow sips, spreads warmth through chilled limbs, easing shock and coaxing exhausted eyelids toward restful heaviness. It is the plain canvas group, the hopeless who receive the surgeon's gentlest attention. He kneels beside a boatswain whose chest bears a fist-sized splinter too near the heart to risk removal. Rather than steel, he offers calm. A folded blanket beneath the head, a thumb dipped in honey to moisten cracked lips, and a quiet promise to stay until final breath. From his pocket he produces a whittled flute, no longer than a quill. Soft notes drift, weaving with creaks of timbers overhead, casting a hush so profound that distant cannon fade to a dim heartbeat in the hull. Some might call it indulgence music for a dying man while battle rages, but the surgeon knows these measures spare more than one soul. The onlookers, the still-fighting crew, and even himself find solace in the humble melody, a reminder that compassion can bloom even in gunsmoke soil. Minutes blur into hours as the fight ebbs and flows outside. Between rushes of the wounded, the surgeon orders buckets of seawater, hauled, warmed briefly over the galley's iron grate, and infused with crushed thyme and sea salt, an improvised antiseptic bath. Blood-slick arms plunge instruments beneath the aromatic steam. Crimson ribbons curl away into the brine like surrendering banners. Each cleansing becomes a meditation. Swirl, clink, lift, inspect, an unhurried ritual anchoring the mind amid shrieking chaos. Assistants learn quickly to match his tempo. No sudden clatter, no harsh words, only the steady hush of task following task, as rhythmic as waves lapping a quiet cove. Those listening now may sense that same tide-like rhythm, pulling them gently toward sleep's shore. When powder stores run low, and distant cheers hint at victory. A different urgency grips the hold. The surgeon turns to the barrel of casks, once filled with salt pork, now repurposed for barrel gut sutures, strands of salted intestine, supple and strong. He threads a curved needle and demonstrates the figure-8 stitch on a scrap of sail, teaching the cabin boy through touch and whisper rather than lecture, fostering calm where worry might have sprouted. Together they close a gaping shoulder wound, sprinkling powder of ground cloves to dull sting and mask rank odors. Each pull of the suture draws skin like tightening canvas, and though the patient groans, his eyes follow the needle's arc with odd wonder, as if the slow dance of flesh mending were a lullaby all its own. Above deck, the ship's bell tolls cease. Only the creak of settling rigging remains. Victory brings no respite for the surgeon. Now begins the barrel walk. When he and his small retinue traverse the lower deck, inspecting every hammock, they carry a lantern shielded with blue cloth to spare sleeping eyes harsh glare, and within its twilight glow they whisper diagnoses. A cracked rib bound tight in linen. A concussion eased by lavender water dabbed onto temples. A suspected gut puncture marked for hourly watch. Even those who insist they are fine surrender to the gentle press of fingertips along spine and sternum, lulled by the firm yet soothing cadence of instructions. Breathe deep, hold, let go. The ship is quiet now, but that soft command rings on like a mantra for listeners, curled beneath their own covers. At dawn's full light, he briefly steps onto the blood-washed deck. Victory flags snap overhead, gulls wheel, and the horizon blushes gold. In his journal, he records numbers losses, saves, the miraculous revival of the young gunner whose heart still beats despite iron cautery. Yet beneath statistics, he pens reflections in looping script. Today, I learned that courage may be measured not in cannon fire, but in a crewman's trust as he takes the strap between his teeth. He closes the book with a sigh that is almost a prayer, cheeks smudged with ash, but eyes clear. The scent of cooling tar mingles with sunrise salt, and for a rare moment no cries echo below. The ocean itself seems to exhale, as though admiring the fragile hush the surgeon has carved from war. Before relinquishing watch, he distributes mugs of warm barley broth, laced with lemon peel, to every conscious patient, a humble feast of recovery. The liquid slides down raw throats, settling stomachs, unsettled by blood and rum. With each sip, shoulders sag from rigid alertness to tentative ease. Hammocks sway as bodies finally yield to gravity. The surgeon hums that Saint-Domingue lullaby once more, the melody weaving through the hold like silver thread, binding hearts to rest. Soon snores mingle with distant gull cries, and wounded men drift into a sleep deeper than gunpowder ever allowed. As the lanterns dim, so too may your own waking thoughts flicker out, guided by the same gentle voice that carried these buccaneers from broadside terror to barrel-gut courage, and into dreams where sea breezes whisper of tomorrow's quieter tides. And thus this chapter closes 10 steady breaths of story, stitched together like a fresh-mended sail, spanning wound and wonder alike. Let the echo of calm linger in your ears, and as your eyes grow heavy, remember the surgeon's measured steps, deliberate, unhurried, shaped by compassion amid cannonade. There is power in such stillness, a power that now invites you to slip softly beneath waves of sleep. Where the brine is cool, the timbers hold firm, and the distant lull of the ocean promises another tale when next we meet. The battle haze has drifted away on dawn's soft breeze, and in its wake the ship lies at anchor in a secluded cove, where tall mangroves lean like green sentinels against the brightening sky. Their roots rattle quietly in the ebbing tide, a natural wind chime that lulls the battered crew toward stillness. Sunlight filters through palm fronds overhead, casting slow-moving lattice of gold across the deckboards now scrubbed free of blood. It is here, in this calm inlet mirrored like glass, that the surgeon begins the next, quieter chapter of Kara regimen, not of hurried cautery or barrel gut stitches, but of patient mending, steady breath, and stories shared at hammock-side. The very air smells of renewal. Crushed mint leaves from a shoreline patch mingle with warm pine pitch, and every inhalation carries a hint of promise, inviting wounded spirits to loosen their knots. He transforms the gun deck into a makeshift infirmary bathed in natural light. Hammocks are rehung lower and wider, their canvas sewn together so injured limbs can rest without strain. Empty powder kegs become bedside tables stacked with linen rolls, basins of citrus-steeped water, and clay jars containing calendula salve. The surgeon speaks softly, almost in a murmur designed for sleep aid, as he demonstrates how to coil bandages around a fractured forearm. Start from the hand, spiral upward, never too tight, feel the pulse. Cabin boys learn the rhythm until it matches the hush of waves slapping hull. Confidence grows in that steady pattern. The deck itself seems to breathe along, expanding with each outward wrap, contracting gently at each tuck. Rehabilitation begins with minute movements. A gunner whose left leg was spared but weakened practices flexing toes beneath the linen, counting to 5 in the lilting cadence of a sea shanty slowed to lullaby speed. The surgeon slips a smooth riverstone, warmed in sun, beneath the sole to encourage sensation. Each gradual shift of weight is accompanied by a sip of willow bark tea to dull ache without fogging thought. Elsewhere, a deckhand relearns grip strength by wringing seawater from sand-filled pouches, the scrape of burlap echoing like distant rain. Between exercises, the surgeon narrates calming tales of sailors who survived similar wounds and later danced jigs on tavern table stories that plant seeds of possibility deeper than any tincture. Prosthetics, to take shape beneath his calloused fingers. From driftwood planks, he selects pieces with graceful curves already carved by tide, then whittles them into crutches that cradle the armpit in gentle hollows. For a freshly amputated gunner's mate, he fashions a peg leg from sturdy lignum vitae, wood so dense it sinks, polishing it with sharkskin until the surface gleams like oiled mahogany. Each stroke of the rasp is deliberate, metronomic, a sound reminiscent of distant surf that eases listeners toward tranquil focus. When the new limb is finally strapped on with leather harness, the surgeon encourages the mate to take 3 careful steps, counting them aloud in a honey-slow voice. 1. Steady. 2. Breathe. 3. Rest. Applause rings softly under the forecastle, tinged with hope. Not all wounds are visible. Nightfall finds several crew huddled beneath the quarterdeck in uneasy silence. Memories of cannon roar, darting behind their eyes. The surgeon addresses these shadows with equal gravity, guiding simple breathing rituals mentored by a healer. Inhale through the nose to the count of 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 6, as though releasing ballast into the sea. To anchor the mind, he crushes ylang-ylang blossoms and lavender into warmed coconut oil, massaging a dab onto each man's temple. The floral vapor drifts upward, clinging to the beams, layering the night with a scent reminiscent of far-off gardens untouched by war. Murmured narratives, soft-spoken recollections of calm harbors and moonlit fishing nets follow the fragrance, weaving the crew's anxious pulses into slower synchrony. Meals become medicine, too. The galley fires simmer pots of fish stew, fortified with taro, plantain, and diced papaya, a comforting medley that slides easily past swollen throats. Citrus peels steep in every barrel of water, infusing sips with bracing tartness that ignites sluggish appetites. For those unable to chew, the surgeon blends boiled yam and goat's milk into velvety spooned gently while he recounts tales of Polynesian navigators who drew entire oceanic charts in their heads. Each swallow nourishes not only tissue but imagination, replacing trauma's looping echoes with visions of coral-ringed atolls and starlit sails. Night by night, bodies knit to the cadence of these stories, and listeners beyond the quarterdeck, perhaps tucked into bed with headphones, feel their own breathing deepen in sympathetic ease. On the weather deck, physical therapy sessions bloom beneath the rising moon. A length of thick rope is strung waist-high between two masts. Recovering sailors practice balancing by sliding bare feet along the hemp arms outstretched. Laughter bubbles when someone wobbles. Yet the surgeon reframes each stumble as progress. When the rope trembles, the core learns. Nearby, he has set pails of smooth river stones beside shallow tubs of seawater. Patients scoop stones with their toes, drop them into the tubs, then retrieve them with the opposite foot exercises that strengthen arches and distract minds with small goals. The hiss of brine around ankles, the clink of stones, the creak of rigging overhead together compose a maritime lullaby, soothing enough that even ship's cats curl contentedly on coils of line, eyes half closed. Journaling becomes another tool of healing. The surgeon distributes stubby graphite sticks and scraps of vellum to any willing hand, encouraging the wounded to sketch dreams or chart progress in private cipher. Some draw caricatures of sea beasts. Others outline the curve of the cove where orchids grow in purple clusters. One quiet quartermaster traces spirals each swirl representing a night's sleep free from nightmare. These pages, once dried, are tucked into a wooden coffer labeled Chart of Spirits, and each new entry is celebrated with a quiet toast of diluted rum and honey. The soft scratch of lead on vellum echoes inside the hull like tiny oars, dipping into water, steady, rhythmic, reassuring. Gradually, as days lengthen into early summer, a hush of contentment settles over the shiplest, the hush of exhaustion, more of patient confidence. Morning muster finds former invalids assisting newer casualties, teaching them how to tighten a bandage just so, or how to breathe through a phantom limb flare until it ebbs like low tide. The surgeon supervises but intervenes rarely, allowing bonds to form through shared purpose. At dusk, he records the ship's heartbeat in his ever-thickening ledger, pulse rates trending slower, nightmares reported fewer, peg leg stride length increased by 2 knots worth of deck. When at last the anchor chain rattles home and sails billow for new horizons, the surgeon stands at the bow, sensing wind tug at his coat. Around him, men once bound in crimson rags, now trim lines, their knots sure, their laughter unforced. The harbor recedes behind a curtain of sea spray, yet its lessons linger in every unhurried heartbeat aboard. Below decks, the infirmary remains, prepared bandages folded, herbs hung to dry, prosthetics stowed within reach, but the air hums with lighter energy, as though the ship itself has inhaled hope and exhaled dread. Moonlight drapes the main deck in pewter ribbons, and the faint splash of phosphorescent waves paints shifting constellations along the hull. Now that bruises are mending and stitches have settled into dovetail seams of knotted flesh, a subtler ailment emerges in quiet glances and restless dreams, the kind no poultice can soothe. Tonight, the surgeon turns healer of spirits rather than bodies, laying out a patchwork altar atop an upended water cask. A weather-cracked psalm book from Bristol flutters beside a woven Nkisi doll traded on the Guinea coast. A St. Jude medallion glints beside shark-tooth beads strung on palm fiber. The first remedy he prepares is not swallowed, but worn. He selects coils of scarlet thread, said in Valencia's dockside lore, to bind the red wind that carries fevers on its back. With fingers practiced from hours of barrel-gut sutures, he knots 7 tiny loops, murmuring in a voice scarcely above the creak of timbers. Uno para la sangre, dos para la piel. 1 for blood, 2 for skin until each loop rests snug against the next like nested ripples. He ties the charm around a topman's wrist, ensuring the knot sits over the pulse, so the talisman can listen to the life beneath. The topman closes his eyes, his breath slows, shoulders fall, and in that minute surrender, the thread has already half done its medicine, coaxing anxious currents to smooth seas. Those listening in their own hammock of blankets may feel their own heartbeats mirror that softened cadence. From a carved gourd, the surgeon pours a dusting of gray-white ashtha, remains of last month's battle deck scrubbed from planks and calcined in a galley flame. He mixes it with seawater, stirring until the slurry thickens, then dips a croquille and paints runic spirals upon the inner hull, protective wheels, taught by a Norse carpenter in Port Royal. The spirals catch lantern glow like ghostly compass roses, giving watchers a quiet point of focus that draws wandering thoughts inward. When someone asks what the sigils do, the surgeon answers only, they remind the wood to stay brave. The abstract reply cloaks deeper intent. Belief itself is a curative current, and symbols are the oars that steer it. In whispering darkness, faith no matter, the tongue tugs fretful minds toward harbor. Next comes the hush bowl, a pewter basin filled with still water. He sprinkles shavings of beeswax, slivers of lime peel, and 3 grains of black gunpowder across its mirrored surface. Each item bears a story. Wax for sealing wounds, citrus for scurvy's banishment, powder for the roar left ringing in ears. Sailors approach one by one, gaze into the bowl, and name the sound that troubles their dreams: splinter, crack, mother's cry, cannon thunder. The surgeon skims the floating flecks with a cockle shell and flicks them into the sea. As ripples fade, so too, they believe, will the echoes trapped behind their ribs. Remote listeners, tracing their own reflections on midnight screens, may find static worries slipping beneath a glassy calm. Herbal smoke follows. He braids sage with dried hibiscus petals and coils of pineapple leaf, then lights the bundle and fans the fragrant plume into every corner of the hold. The aroma earthy, citrus sweet, faintly metallic settles over hammocks like a warm blanket. Sailors inhale through parted lips, the vapors coating throats raw from grog and salt. Much as white willow bark charms away inflammation of flesh, this scented haze soothes inflamed memory. The olfactory nerve, quickest path to the limbic mind, ferries calm with the sureness of a trade wind. Soft narration drifts with the smoke, offering a reminder that this is simply another form of medicine. Molecules meeting neurons in a dusklit dance that helps with sleep as surely as any draught of laudanum. For broken courage, the surgeon brews grog of the ghosts, a concoction equal parts watered rum, guava leaf tea, and a spoon's tip of crushed sapphire sea salt. He serves it warm, in tin cups etched with small crosses. The salt restores dwindled electrolytes. The guava tannins tighten wounded gums, and the measured rum quiets tremors in bone and mind alike. But it is the act of gathering cups, clinking, steam curling upward, that knits community. Together they toast the spirits of absent mates, affirming that memory is company, not torment. As the liquid courses inward, chests loosen. Laughter, tentative at first, brightens the corners of the hold. It is impossible to swallow fear and gratitude in the same gulp, and the surgeon knows gratitude is the stronger draught. Even far-off viewers might imagine that warmth sliding down, a liquid lull guiding eyelids heavier. He recognizes, too, the healing force of story. When the moon climbs its zenith, he gathers the crew beneath the forecastle, where the planks still smell of resin and rope. With a conch shell for a makeshift horn, he calls for tales of protective charms from a dozen ports. A Barbadian cook speaks of coral beads against drowning. A Kate d'Ivoire helmsman recalls cowrie belts that deflect blade strikes. A Dublin powder monkey swears by iron nails hammered into a mast under a new moon. Each narrative arrives in a different rhythm, but together they build a lattice of shared superstition, transforming solitary fears into communal folklore. The telling itself, measured and melodic, becomes a therapeutic pulsant, audible, rocking, chair-inviting listeners on deck and in distant bedrooms alike to drift on the cadence of human connection. Between stories, the surgeon demonstrates bone-rattle breathing, taught by a Bahamian Obeah woman. Crew sit cross-legged, palms on knees. On each inhale, they envision ribs widening like a cage door. On each exhale, they imagine loose worries rattling free through that open portal. He underscores the exercise with the soft clack of a deerbone shaker, its rhythm slower than surf, but quicker than a heartbeat, guiding lungs to synchronize. 3 minutes of this audible mantra is enough to replace thumping cannons with the hush of sand burying a distant shell. Some remedies dwell in silence itself. At the darkest hour before dawn, he enforces a vow of hush across the shippa, full 60 breaths, where no voice nor footstep breaks the stillness. During those breaths, hammocks creak only with the small sway of slumber. Rigging twangs faintly, and the waterline gurgles like distant lullaby. This enforced quiet is a mirror turned inward. Each sailor meets his own heartbeat without distraction. It is uncomfortable first, then oddly soothing, then utterly absorbing, an island of peace anchored in the middle of the wild sea. When the 60 breaths expire, talk returns in whispers, lighter than before. Silence has skimmed off the residue of lingering dread. So too, perhaps, have you felt those moments in your own listening when the absence of speech became the loudest comfort. Finally, to seal the night's medicine, the surgeon opens his ledger and adds a new leaf stitched from parchment. He inks a passage that reads like both prescription and prayer. Remember, the mind is a second Hullif. Its planks are loose. Seawater enters even the soundest frame. Thus, we caulk with story, seal with song, brace with belief. He blows on the wet letters until they gleam dry, then tucks a single sage leaf between the pages before closing the book. The crew watch the gesture and mimic closure palms pressed together, shoulders released, eyelids sighing downward. As lanterns are snuffed one by one, the dark swells gently. cradling men and memories alike. Out beyond the cove, bioluminescent swirls mark the passing keel, a final charm drawn upon water by the slow-moving ship. Let that glowing wake guide your own thoughts into calm depths tonight, where sea ghost remedies settle like soft sand over worry, and sleep rises, sure and slow, with the tide. The first whisper of sickness comes not with a scream, but with a tremor, barely a shiver, up the spine of an otherwise stalwart gunner, who, at sunset, sets down his roasting spit to steady himself against the galley bulkhead. A lantern sways overhead, its flame fluttering like a nervous bird. And in that flicker, the surgeon's practiced eye catches the faint flush blooming across the man's cheeks. By the next dawn, 2 more sailors complain of iron-heavy limbs and tongues that feel too large for their mouths. The Caribbean horizon remains postcard.com, but beneath the placid veil, the crew's collective heartbeat quickens. Every man aboard carries some memory of ports where fevers stalked like an invisible cutlass. As gulls circle lazily overhead, the surgeon unclasps his medicine chest with resigned precision, knowing that an enemy smaller than powder grain has slipped the watch and now hides inside every shared mug and handshake. He begins with observation, that quiet art of mapping the body's betrayals. Foreheads shine with dew-like sweat, even in morning cool. Pupils shrink from daylight, pulse quickens, and, most ominously, rose-red papules speckle the clavicles of 2 deckhands like spilled pomegranate seeds. Smallpox or Red Death, as sailors curse, it can fell a crew more surely than broadsides, its path stippled across skin and lung alike. The surgeon presses each blister with a goose-quill tip, testing for the telltale spring of fluid beneath thin dermis. He smells the breath of the sufferers, noting the sweet, overripe scent that heralds infection's deeper reach, and he measures fevers with the back of his hand in lieu of mercury glass he cannot spare. Numbers are means to certainty, but here, experience is thermometer enough. The heat rolling off these men feels like forge fire, and time to act is fleeting. The quarterdeck is swiftly divided into zones by lengths of tar-stiff rope. Forward of the mainmast becomes the green side, where healthy sailors bunk, eat, and work in wary silence. Aft transforms into the fever nest, canvas awnings unfurled to shade the afflicted from blinding noon light. Orderlies chosen for steady nerves rather than rank dip strips of linen in vinegar and knot them over nose and mouth. A crude mask against airborne wickedness. Buckets of seawater warmed on the galley. Great serve for constant hand washing. The brine laced with lime and a pinch of gunpowder ash, believed to temper contagion. Every object that crosses the invisible cordon spoons, cups, ladles is plunged into rolling boil before it returns. The hiss of water, a ceaseless reminder that vigilance never sleeps. Yet the surgeon knows rope lines alone cannot cage a virus. He petitions the captain to anchor at the nearest uninhabited a mere smudge of white sand and scrub on the horizon where a temporary lazarette may spare the entire crew. Rowboats glide under or bearing pallets, hammocks, and crates of jerked beef toward shore. Slipping into lagoon-clear shallows, they unload the sick onto makeshift stretchers of sailcloth stretched between boarding pikes. The quay's air tastes of sun-baked coral and distant mangrove bloom, a sterile sweetness that seems almost merciful after the sour musk of fever. Palm fronds bend overhead like cathedral vaults, and the surgeon converts the natural shade into wards, staking sailcloth walls that snap softly in trade winds. their flapping cadence oddly soothing to ears tuned for the next cough. Treatment blends hard-won science with desperate creativity. From malarial chill sure to flare once the sun dips, the surgeon grinds Peruvian cinchona bark, its bitter dust packed into paper twists he calls Jesuit bullets. Each patient swallows a pellet chased by tepid water as orange dusk bleeds across the sky. Smallpox pustules are lanced with boar bristle needles, heated red, then swabbed in a paste of rosewater and camphor to cool the fiery itch. Blisters that cloud with yellow serum are sprinkled with powdered charcoal, a trick learned from West African herbalists who claim the black earth draws corruption outward. Between dressings, he composes broth from turtle bone and plantain leaf, simmered until the liquid turns the soft green of new sea glass. Ladled slowly, it coaxes even swollen throats to sip and live another tide. At the heart of his regimen lies a perilous experiment. From pustules of those already stricken, he harvests a single droplet of fluid onto a sliver of cotton and scratches it beneath the skin of the youngest, strongest Dechanza. Primitive variolation whispered about in London salons, but outlawed in many ports. Risk is high, yet surviving such induced illness may armor the crew with immunity, steel strong. He marks each volunteer's forearm with a blue wink swirl and quarantines them in a separate lean-to, monitoring pulses hourly while humming a lullaby to steady his own nerves. Gentle tide, carry the fire, quench it down to ember mild. Night after night, some writhe beneath blankets, but none perish. When scabs harden and fall, leaving pale moons upon tanned flesh, the surgeon dares to hope the worst storm has passed. Healthy sailors, haunted by guilt, pace the beach perimeter, glancing toward their bedridden mates. The weight of waiting presses heavy on shoulders. To lighten the hush, the surgeon organizes dusk chants, soft-spoken calandra-sponse shanties that ripple across the sand in gentle waves. He hands out maraca-like gourds filled with dried beans, letting rhythm replace dread. Orderlies burn sticks of allspice and sage at the boundary between wards and campsite, sweet smoke drifting through palm trunks like cathedral incense. Each breath of that fragrant air reaches deep, teasing knots from stomach and chest, lulling watchers into a calm, vigilant trance. The island itself seems to exhale, as though grateful its solitude now shelters acts of mercy. Days fold into one another, marked by the length of shadows on sand. Survivors begin to sit upright, pockmarks darkening like constellations on cheeks and arms. The surgeon brings a tarnished mirror to each convalescent, inviting them to meet their reflection. At first, they recoil, familiar faces rendered alien, but he reminds them every cratered scar is proof of conquest, like a privateer's medal. Slowly, pride supplants shame. Men trace fingertip along healed craters and speak quietly of futures not yet written. For many, the promise of returning to Ciudec beneath boots, a horizon unbroken, becomes salve, stronger than calendula or cinchona. They practice hoisting coconuts on makeshift block and tackle rigs, laughter rising when knots slip and fruit thuds into sand. Each jovial shout a milestone on the map back to health. Are committed to the sea with whispered verses, the surf swallowing sorrow in foamy white hush. Survivors, bearing fresh strength and new immunity, strike the sailcloth walls, fold pallets, and load rowboats. Before departure, the surgeon sprays the emptied camp with lime mixed in brine, the pungent drizzle hissing on sun-hot sand like distant rain. He leaves behind a single wooden cross carved hurriedly from driftwood, its shadow stretching toward tide line. a quiet sentinel for future wanderers. Sails are unfurled in full sun to bleach, every rope swabbed with vinegar, and the forecastle fumigated with rosemary and juniper, whose sharp perfume outmuscles the memory of illness. Barrels once used for water are charred inside with quick-burning oak chips, then refilled under cloud-caught rain. Finally, a square of yellow canvas, the quarantine flag flaps from the mizzen to declare the ship's recent affliction to any harbor master. It will stay raised the mandated 40 days, but within hearts below decks, pride flies higher. They faced an unseen adversary and lived. The surgeon records it all in his ledger: symptoms, remedies, losses, triumphs, then closes the book and breathes out his exhale as long and slow as a receding wave. On deck, the surgeon leans against the rail, listening to timbers creak like a giant's satisfied sigh. Stars bloom overhead in careless abundance, each a reminder of resilience, glittering in black velvet sky. For those who share this tale from the quiet of their own beds, let the ship's renewed heartbeat sync with yours, a steady cadence, neither racing nor dull, carrying you across dark water toward dawn. May every fearsome contagion fade behind you like a wake dissolving in moonlight, and may rest settle upon you as softly as phosphorescence settling upon midnight seas. But no amount of lie can scour away the storms that rage behind a sailor's eyes. The surgeon has long known that wounds invisible to daylight can fester deepest after sunset. Sudden rages sparked by nothing, laughter that turns brittle halfway, night terrors that yank men upright with a strangled cry. Such tempests, born of sleepless weeks, poor rations, and memories salted with fear, threaten to capsize discipline faster than any rogue wave. So he prepares this evening as he would for battle only. The enemy now is despair itself, stalking the forecastle with soft, unhurried steps, seeking cracks through which to seep. A carpenter forgets the names of his own tools and stares at them like strange fish. A cabin boy speaks to an absent dog curled beneath his hammock. An old helmsman, once jocular, stands motionless at the rail, murmuring to figures that glide only across his mind's horizon. The surgeon notes these ghost turns alongside more familiar irritants, scurvies, late-stage melancholy, rum-stoked tremors, the prickly haze that creeps across brain tissue when bilge fumes build up balautics. His ledger fills with phrases like gaze unmoored, tongue stumbling, dreams bite. Each entry, though clinical, is inked with gentle care, for naming the maelstrom is the first rope thrown toward rescue. Scurvy, he knows, does more than rot gums. It frays the very stitching of reason. Long before limbs bruise black, minds sour into bleak conviction that sunlight is a lie and tomorrow a rumor. To counter this, he mixes a golden cordial lime juice, grated ginger, a shred of saffron, and a spoon of honey shaken in warm rainwater, until it glows like dawn captured in a cup. Patients drink under watchful eye, encouraged to describe the flavor in lavish detail, coaxing dulled senses back to color. Words like spark, zing, and sunfire kindle among the mess tables, tiny lanterns flicked on inside skulls. The cordial may strengthen capillaries, but its greater power lies in pulling thought away from the dark and into the bright, tangible now. When hands shake as though drumming some frantic code, the surgeon trades their rum ration for silver sleep milk, oat broth simmered with poppy seed, nutmeg, and a scant swirl of watered arrack, served steaming at dog watch. It dulls jagged edges without kindling fiery hallucinations. He pairs the draft with a simple ritual stone stacking along the quarterdeck rail. Sailors choose smooth ballast stones and balance them, one atop another, letting focus anchor their runaway thoughts. By the time a tower of 5 stones stands steady, knuckles slacken, jaws unclench, and the flashing shapes at periphery vision fade like fog under sunrise. A braid of rope fiber, a sliver of whale tooth. One by one, they speak a single sentence of the nightmare that plagues them, then set the token on the cloak's faint gridlines. When every fear is anchored, the surgeon folds the cloth thrice and tucks it beneath the mizzenmast, declaring the map now belongs to the ship, not the men. The physical gesture, small yet deliberate, severs dread from ownership. Sailors drift to hammocks, believing the vessel itself carries their burdens, creaking benevolently with every swell. He tends imagination, too, with tinctures of tranquility. Stop are dried to violet curls and steeped with chamomile and a sliver of cinnamon bark, yielding moonless tea. Sipped slowly while gazing at the horizon's silver rim, it eases the tight band that forms behind temples during long watches. To amplify the brew, he teaches 4-eye breathing, inhale while tracing a star's arc, exhale as it disappears behind the sail. The rhythmic motion links lung to cosmos, reminding anxious minds they float on a predictable celestial tide rather than adrift in chaos. Crewmen who once saw only black gulf now report constellations shaped like anchors, dolphins, even homeport rooftops, mental cartography stitched with hope. Music threads through his regimen like ligature through flesh. From the bosun's chest he retrieves a battered hurdy-gurdy, whose crank squeals at first, then settles into a low droning sigh. Over that drone he layers gentle melodies, 3 notes ascending, 3 notes falling, mirroring a heartbeat's rise and rest. The sound drifts into corners where lamplight cannot reach, smoothing frayed nerves with vibrations older than language. Some sailors, eyes half shut, sway in time. Others hum countertunes from forgotten childhoods, weaving a sonic hammock that cradles the entire hold. Even the ship's timbers resonate, knots thrumming faintly, as if remembering forest winds long past. The surgeon smiles, knowing music can suture what scalpels never touch. To anchor sanity, he repurposes the crow's nest into an observatory of calm. Each clear midnight, one troubled soul climbs with him to that airy perch where wind sings soft and steady. He brings a palm-sized lens ground by a Dutch optiker. Together they tilt it toward Saturn's ringed glow or Jupiter's wandering moons. Seeing distant orbs in perfect, silent motion convinces the anxious mind that the universe follows laws larger than any personal storm. On descent, the sailor pockets a star chart drawn in charcoal and ashproof of order to consult when dreams churn. More than once, a man once haunted by phantom flames has slept through the night after such sky-gazing, his breath deep and even as though synced to planetary rhythm. An hour before dawn, he dims every lantern until only ember glow remains, then guides the crew through still-point watch. Sitting cross-legged, backs to masts, they listen for the faintest onboard sound. Rope fibers rubbing a seabird's distant croak, the hull's sigh. When someone identifies a noise, they lift a finger, acknowledge it with a nod, then let it pass. One by one, sounds crest and fall, leaving a longer hush behind. In that widening quiet, hearts slow to match the pulse of calm water. The surgeon counts 90 breaths. By the final exhale, eyelids droop, shoulders loosen, and even the most haunted gaze softens like wax beneath gentle heat. Dawn blushes at last. brushing rows across sails and faces alike. The ship greets morning with fewer furrowed brows, more eyes bright despite little sleep. The surgeon notes in his ledger, madness held at bay by cordial, chord, and constellation. He closes the book, feeling the deck's subtle lift beneath bare soles, a reminder that support often comes from below, unseen. And so the tempests of the mind subside, replaced by manageable breezes that fill sails toward another horizon. May you, too, feel that easing now. Let breath steady, let eyelids ease, and sail onward through night's calm embrace, secure in the knowledge that even the fiercest inner storm can be charted, named, and, with quiet care, steered safely home. Phosphorescent ripples wink against the hull as night leans into midnight. And with that hush comes talk of subtler foes than steel or shot toxins that slip past watchful eyes on the barb of a fish, the rind of a fruit, or the treacherous splash of contaminated rum. Among pirates, poison is a whispered word, weighted with dread, for it strikes in silence and leaves no heroic scars to boast of later. The surgeon, lantern held low, senses the crew's unease and knows tonight's lesson must reach deeper than folklore. He lifts a small cedar casket, banded in brass, the antidote chest. Inside lie vials of powdered charcoal, coils of dried snakeroot, and tabloid slips of chalky antimony tools, meant to wrest life back from the edge where venom reigns. The very act of unlatching the lid steadies breath, like revealing a compass when stars hide. Knowledge, he reminds them, is its own first antidote. Poisons ride the sea's trade routes as eagerly as silken sugar. In crates of unfamiliar spices hide crushed castor beans, potent enough to sicken a deck's worth of men. In barrels of rum, sweet lead acetate leaches from cheap pewter valves, tainting every celebratory swig. Even gifts can fester. A captured chest of saffron once came dusted with arsenic-laced turmeric, turning giddy cooks yellow before the surgeon traced the culprit stain. More insidious still are the living hazards tucked into prize cargo velvet green manchineel apples whose first bite scorches lips, or glistening cone snail shells whose beauty masks a harpoon of neurotoxin. The surgeon catalogues each specimen the way a cartographer outlines shoals, and pins quick sketches to the galley bulkhead so cooks and quartermasters alike can steer clear of lethal curiosities. Such drawings, fluttering gently in the draft, become guardian pennants against unseen storms. Stowage of countermeasures requires its own discipline. The antidote chest is sandpacked for coolness, its glass vials corked and wax-sealed, each seal etched with a simple rune, a circle for purgatives, a triangle for binding agents, a wave for pain-easing elixirs. A cracked seal signals immediate replenishment. There is no room for half measures when minutes decide fates. Nearby hangs a roll of parchment, listing doses by weight, scratching in 3 tongues, so any literate hand may act if the surgeon is felled. Buckets of fresh water sit permanently beneath the stern ladder, reserved solely for mixing remedies. In an emergency, a cabin boy knows to fetch them without command. Through ritualized placement, the crew learns that calm order can outpace panic, and that anticipation is the surest gauntlet a toxin must cross. Nature's venoms strike fastest in warm tides where reefs glitter like jeweled traps. A sea snake hauled aboard, entwined in a net, can sink fangs before a sailor even curses. Its bite pours coiling dread through veins, muscles growing leaden within breaths. The surgeon's response is swift. A ligature, pressed above the puncture. Then powdered snakeroot tea coaxed between clenched teeth, its alkaloids racing the venom toward the heart. For stonefish spines or stingray barbs, he plunges the limb into near-boiling water. Heat denatures protein-based poisons better than any charm man, mixes vinegar and bruised basil into a poultice to cool the inevitable inflammation. Throughout the ordeal, he speaks in measured cadence, describing each step aloud so the patient's mind anchors to process rather than pain. Voice becomes tourniquet on terror. Deliberate poisoning mutinies, cowardly cousin, warrants, subtler, sleuthing. When 3 men collapse after evening grog, lips bluish and pupils pinsmole, the surgeon suspects tincture of laurel, or perhaps powdered opium slipped into the rum. He orders stomachs purged with warm salt water, then doses spirits of camphor to jolt sluggish pulses. With silver tweezers, he lifts residue from the flagon's lip, sniffing the almond-sweet ghost of cyanogenic seed. He keeps the discovery quiet, while discreetly examining cups for fingerprints in candle soot. Justice will come, but first the living must stay alive. When the men finally stir, wrapped in wool beside a brazier, he dims the lanterns and narrates a slow breathing exercise, guiding them back from the night's black edge. Under that low murmur, even vengeance sleeps for now. Foodborne toxins prove more democratic, striking saint and scoundrel alike. A barrel of salt pork gone rusty exudes a sour-sweet reek that sets tongues tingling before nausea crashes in. The surgeon stirs charcoal into watered wine, forming an inky draught served by the ladleful. The porous carbon traps, histamines, and botulinum spores, ferrying them harmlessly through the gut. He follows with thin rice gruel infused with grated nutmeg, its gentle warmth coaxing cramped intestines to unclench. By morning, hammocks sway with exhausted but recovering men, the air faintly scented of wood smoke and spice rather than bile. For listeners curled in their own hammocks afar, imagine that comfort, a stomach settling like calm after chop, rhythmic creak and gentle perfume persuading sleep to creep closer. Tropical foliage offers weapons for both harm and rescue. The milky sap of the sandbox tree blisters skin unprotected, yet boiled with tamarind, it yields a salve that draws poison arrows clean. Crushed noni seeds, bitter as betrayal, nonetheless dissipate the vertigo born of curare-laced darts favored by South American corsairs. The surgeon keeps samples in nested calabashes, each labeled not only with warning but with origin tale, so the remedy carries a memory of the land that birthed it, binding geography to cure. He shares these stories at dusk, voice weaving through the smell of simmering cassava, teaching that every shadowed grove hides both blade and bandage, and that wisdom is learning to ask which is which. Experimentation under sail is equal parts courage and careful note-keeping. To test a rumored antidote against pufferfish tetrodotoxin, he scrapes liver slivers onto catgut, then dips them into a decoction of clove, turmeric, and fermented rice. A minuscule sample pricks the arm of a willing volunteer, watchful eye, of coarsened when only minor numbness follows. He deems the mixture promising, though far from perfect. He transcribes observations by moonlight, color, odor, time to symptom, pulse changes. Thus the antidote chest evolves like a living map, each new entry a coastline charted, each failed remedy a shoal marked in careful red. Education is the antidote for ignorance, and so the surgeon turns instruction into nightly theater. He lines the rail with jars of colored water, water amber for acids, indigo for alkalizin, challenges deckhands to predict their reactions with powdered chalk. With each fizz and cloud, astonishment shifts to curiosity, then to lasting memory. He quizzes them on pulse locations, wrist, neck, ankle, so if venom strikes below, a comrade above can track the enemy's climb. Competitive laughter mingles with the salty dusk, and by show's end every sailor holds a frag of life-saving lore tucked beside flint and knife. That mirthlit mastery, more than any tonic, fortifies the crew against tomorrow's unseen threats. Night deepens, lanterns gutter low, and the surgeon returns the cedar casket to its berth beneath the broad companionway. Its brass latch clicks shut like a satisfied heartbeat, echoing softly through the hushed hold. He walks the deck one last time, inhaling air washed clean by moonsilver, checking that water buckets gleam. Ligatures hang within reach, and stars wheel overhead in serene order. Then, leaning on the rail, he invites you wandering soul on distant shorent to the same slow exhale. Feel the weight of poisons fade, replaced by the quiet conviction that preparedness is peace. Let the antidote chest close in your own mind, sealing fear away, while waves lap like a mother's lullaby against the hull, drawing you gently, irresistibly, into healing sleep. The Caribbean night breathes warm and velvet dark as the surgeon stands upon the quarterdeck, his hands cradling a slim leather folio stained by salt and time. Within lie pages where births, amputations, fevers, and poisons have each earned a line of cramped ink. Yet tonight the folio opens to a quieter duty, to bear witness to the final passages of those who will neither mend nor rise with dawn. Every soul aboard feels the hush tighten, for burials at sea are as inevitable as tides, and the ritual, if performed with intention, binds crew, vessel, and departed in a brief moment of luminous stillness that lingers long after the last ripple fades. The surgeon begins preparation hours before moonrise, selecting fabrics and herbs with the same precision he once saved a limb. Canvas hammocks, frayed but clean, are inspected for sturdy seams. Each body will be sewn inside with sailmaker's twine, a last protective enclosure against the unwitnessed depths. Into every hammock he slips a sprig of rosemary for remembrance and a twist of dried sweet orange peel, its aroma warm and bright like sunrise, a promise that light follows every shade. At the corpse's feet he places a flat stone, wrapped in oiled linen, to guide descent. Tradition says the weight should rest where memory lingers longest, anchoring heartache beneath the waves, so grief upon decks above may lighten. Through these gestures, science of decay meets poetry of leave-taking, and the ship readies itself to perform the soft alchemy of turning flesh to legend. The call to assembly sounds at 2 bells of the middle watch, when stars spill overhead like scattered salt, and most of the world sleeps unaware. Lanterns are doused, save 3, their flames trimmed low and hooded with blue glass, casting a dusky glow that spares fretful eyes harsh glare. Crew gather in concentric arcs, closest friends near the rail, new hands farther back. Each man's presence a silent pledge that no one is surrendered alone. The surgeon, acting chaplain for these border crossings, keeps his voice soft-spoken and steady, weaving practical instruction with words tuned for calm hearts and sleepless listeners alike. He invites all to breathe in unison, 4 counts in, 4 held, 6 releastant, till a single rhythmic hush blankets the deck like fine mist, and even distant gulls seem to coast upon its gentle tide. He opens a weather-worn copy of The Sailor's Companion, yet reads only fragments. The remainder he replaces with stories harvested from the deceased in happier months. for a top man lost to fever. He recounts the daring mid-mast dance performed the night of their first captured prize, recalling the flash of moon on tarred rope and the chorus of cheers that rattled gun ports. For a cook's mate stilled by poisoned rum, he tells of cinnamon lime biscuits that once filled bellies with unexpected sweetness, the smell of spice mingling with pitch and sea spray. These memories, spoken slowly, drift over the rail and settle upon waves like petals, each anecdote a map for the spirit to find its way back into collective tale. When the final name echoes into night, the surgeon nods to two bearers who lift the stitched hammock upon a board of polished tick kept solely for this purpose. A drumless cadence begins. 5 measured steps to the rail, a pause, then another 5, soles brushing planks in whisper-soft glide. No clang of arms, no barked order-only creak of timber and breath of wind. A procession crafted to soothe rather than stir. At the rail, they tilt the board and hesitate. In that hush, the surgeon pours a thin stream of fresh water from a pewter mug over the hammock, murmuring, "Return to the source that carried us all." The trickle glints silver, blessing the canvas with Earth's oldest element and signaling to unseen depths that a traveler approaches. With a final collective exhale, the board tips and gravity draws the shrouded form into the black mirror sea. There is no splash, only a muffled gulp as water folds over the weight and hides it from moonlight. Crew remain motionless, eyes tracing the widening rings until they vanish. Within that vanishing lies acceptance, as if the ocean itself seals the scar. The surgeon watches longest, counting heartbeats to 60 the measure. He believes souls need to slip their earthly coil. At count's end, he lifts his folio, inks a brief epitaph name, date, 3 words of virtue end, then closes the cover with a soft thud, a punctuation gentle enough to usher solace rather than finality. But solace requires tending. As watchers disperse, he kneels beside a small brazier where glowing coals wait. Into the embers, he sprinkles powdered mugwort mixed with scraps of lavender and crushed clove. A fragrant curl of smoke unfurls, wandering through shrouded corners like a lullaby in scent. He instructs each passing sailor to cup the smoke toward their face, inhale, and release memories that chaffa argument over rations. The pang of helplessness beside a sick bay cot, the silent fear that they too might slip unannounced into darkness. The herb-laden plume carries those confessions upward, diffusing them into night where stars can listen without judgment, leaving chests lighter and dreams less knotted. Belaudix, the surgeon, visits empty hammocks, deftly knotting them to beams so vacancies do not yaw wide like broken teeth. In their place, he hangs small votive bundles, cedar shavings, mint leaves, and a single bead carved of bone. These tokens sway gently with the ship's heartbeat, whispering resilience to those who wake in gloom and reach out instinctively for absent friends. In time, bunks will refill with new hands, but until then, the votives stand guard, a tactile reminder that loss may prune, yet life finds room to leaf again. Even distant listeners might picture those bundles in their own shadowed corners, quiet guardians against sudden pangs of loneliness. Sleep, though, remains the surgeon's dearest prescription. As last duty, he moves through the hold, dimming lantern wicks until only ember pinpricks linger, constellations inverted within wooden sky. He hums a Saint-Domingue cradle tune, words long lost but melody intact, its lilting rise and fall, mimicking breaths so perfectly that chests sink unconsciously. Snorers soften to sighs, restless feet still. Satisfied, he retreats to his tiny cabin, guitars the folio shut beneath a scrap of oilcloth, and finally permits his own eyes to shudder, trusting that the sea will keep watch. Above, the ship glides onward, bearing fresh emptiness and quiet gratitude in equal measure, wrapped together like rope strands, twisted stronger by shared strain. Should you be drifting, listener, in a room far from any tide, let this chapter's final hush seep into your bones. Imagine the steady deck beneath, the faint salt-kissed breeze through an open hatch, the lingering perfume of lavender smoke. Feel loss, acknowledged but gentled wounds stitched in story, and the vast, patient ocean cradling memory beneath silvered waves. With each slow breath, lower your own burdens into those depths, trusting they will settle softly on the sand below, while your thoughts rise lighter toward dreaming horizons. Sleep now, buoyed by the unbroken promise that every farewell at sea carries within it the seed of peaceful return. The trade-wind months drift by, and at last the horizon reveals a smear of ochre rooftops and whitewashed walls. Port St. Eloi, a sleepy French outpost huddled behind turquoise reefs. After weeks at sea, the very scent of land-warm clay, baked bread, an undernote of jasmine feels like balm. The surgeon stands near the bowsprit, eyes half closed, letting those fragrances filter through memories of pitch and blood. Tonight he will trade salt-stiff coin for linen, lime juice, and rare tinctures. Tomorrow, perhaps, barter stories with cloistered nuns who run the settlement's infirmary. But for now, he savors the hush that falls over deck as anchors bite sand. A collective exhale, deep and slow, like muscles unclenching after long vigil. Ashore, the surgeon's first pilgrimage is to the apothecary, a narrow shop wedged between a tavern and a cobbler's stall. Madame Rousseau, keeper of this aromatic trove, greets him with a nod that blends curiosity and respect. Pirates may be rough company, yet a surgeon's coin spends as clean as any merchant's. Over low counters, they begin their ritual of soft-spoken haggling praising the potency of St. John's wort oil, pressed just last moon. He, admiring but wary, requesting proof in the form of scent and viscosity. Each vial, uncorked, releases another note: pine, citrus, faint metallic tang clearing the shop's air until it thickens into something almost visible, a swirling tapestry of cures and possibilities. Beyond town walls stands the Sisters of Saint Infirmary. Inside, corridors glow with beeswax candles and the hush of practiced compassion. The surgeon offers a bundle of linen and a cask of rum in exchange for a tour of their tiny ward. Sister Cheeks, dusted with flour from baking communion bread, guides him past straw-stuffed mattresses where soldiers of France heal beside runaway slaves and fever-ridden fishermen. She shows him a cupboard of willow bark tincture aged in cherry barrels, its aroma sweet as apricot. He shares dried guaiacum shavings, explaining their power against joint-gnawing ague. Knowledge flows between them like a tidal channel, quiet, persistent, eroding old boundaries. By dusk, both feel richer, pockets lighter, but minds bright with borrowed cures. Back aboard, the surgeon oversees an unloading that transforms the main hold into a drifting clinic. Kegs of vinegar are rolled to their new berth beside crates of dried citrus. Bolts of Holland linen unfold like winter clouds, soon to be fashioned into bandages. A stout pine case reveals surgical luxuries rare outside European capitals: silver catheters, a brass and glass enema pump, and a delicate trephine whose teeth glint like frost. Crewmen gather in hushed semicircles, eyes wide as if witnessing sorcery. The surgeon, aware that marvel can soothe as deeply as medicine, lets them handle each tool with reverent fingertips and education by touch, engraving shapes into muscle memory should crisis strike when his own hands are occupied. When moonrise glimmers on calm water, carpenters lash 2 empty rum hogsheads and broad planks into a pontoon that extends from the gun deck like a wooden wing. Upon this platform, the surgeon erects what he dubs the floating infirmary, a halfway house between ship and shore. Awnings of sailcloth billow gently overhead, stitched with swatches of indigo that filter daylight into cool shade. Hammocks hang low, allowing surf's rhythm to cradle recovering bodies. Beneath them, woven red mats hold baskets of fresh fruit, their citrus temps mingling with sea salt and tara scent chorus that whispers healing. Even the most stoic bosun relaxes when slung between water and sky, as though the ocean itself were rocking him back into wholeness. Rehabilitation now expands beyond splints and stitches. At dawn, patients practice balance on the pontoon's slight sway, guided by the surgeon's slow cadence. Heel, toe, breathe, sway. Laughter accompanies inevitable stumbles. Salt spray baptizes bare shoulders, cleansing and playful. In the afternoon, Sister rows over with bundles of lavender and marjoram. Together they steep herbs into foot baths that draw heat from swollen joints. Meanwhile, the ship's cook experiments with barley porridge enriched by tamarind pulp and minced papaya, a dish both gentle on stomachs and bright on tongue. Nutrition shifts from mere sustenance to active ally, each spoonful stirring embers of vigor long banked low. Not every lesson proves gentle. A sudden squall erupts one twilight, wind snapping awnings, rain lashing planks. The pontoon bucks like a startled colt, and a convalescent gunner slips, reopening a half-healed thigh wound. Lightning limbs the surgeon's silhouette as he kneels, clamps, and stitches in driving rain, his voice steady despite thunderclaps. Crew huddle under tarpaulins, watching needles flash silver, realizing that healing is not a tranquil harbor but a voyage with its own tempests. When the squall passes, lavender lamps are relit, rainwater sluices clean the fresh sutures, and the patient, trembling yet alive, drinks warm ginger tea seasoned with gratitude. The lesson settles deep. Resilience grows strongest when shaken, then soothed. Evenings bring quieter marvels. The surgeon invites those restless with phantom pains to grind dried rose petals in mortar, releasing scent oils that drift upward like silk threads. While hands work, he recounts fables of distant Alexandria, where scholars once bottled starlight in glass. The tale may be apocryphal, but imagination proves potent anesthetic. Fingers loosen, shoulders drop, and when mortars empty, minds feel lighter too. Later, Sister teaches sailors to braid palm fronds into simple matzah craft that occupies thought and shelters it from looping memories of broadsides. Finished mats line the infirmary floor, each braid a testament to progress, measured not in musket kills, but in moments of patient focus. As the ship readies to depart, Port St. Eloy's shoreline crowds the rail with nuns, merchants, and curious children waving kerchiefs. In return, the crew hoist a new flag alongside their Jolly Rogera white pennant, inked with a caduceus entwined by vines too. Honor the shared work of healing. The floating infirmary is disassembled, yet its spirit lingers in freshly cleaned decks, replenished stores, and hearts newly convinced that survival is more than an act of defiance. It is a craft honed in community. The surgeon, before stowing his ledger, pens one line in bold, unhurried script. Port Santeloi wear, land and tide stitched men and memory alike. He closes the book, listening to the soft clap of parchment meeting leather, a sound as satisfying as sails catching wind. Night envelopes the departing vessel, stars riveted into black velvet overhead. Hammocks creak in easy harmony. Planks exude faint lavender, where herbs still cling in seams. From the forecastle, Sister S' farewell hymn fades, replaced by the hush of keel over calm water. You, dear listener, may feel that hush tugging gently at your own wakefulness, encouraging eyelids to lower like shutters at twilight. Let the memory of a floating infirmary half-ship, half-sanctuary, carry you across the threshold of sleep, where tides are kind and every exhale brings you closer to safe, restorative drift. The surgeon kneels beneath the dappled shadow of the mainsail, spreading a square of oiled parchment inked with faint coastlines and dotted crosses. Each mark is neither reef nor treasure cache, but a living coordinate, where fever grass once grew beside a brackish stream, where violet starflowers whispered sleep into wounded lungs, where a grove of wild cinchona barked its bitter cure against malaria. Lantern light glints on his compass as he traces routes between those points, mapping greenery with the reverence other captains reserve for gold. Around him the deck hushes to a library stillness. Even the gulls seem to glide in mute curiosity as Quill dips, rises, and sketches another bay crowned by tamarind trees. This herbal chart, he tells his wide-eyed cabin boy, is the real lodestone of their voyage, a promise that no matter how far the ship strays, a remedy always waits just over the horizon, rooted in soil and sunlight, older than any charted sea. From a cedar locker near the Sikba bulkhead, he withdraws a chest small enough to carry under one arm, yet heavy with potential. Tiny drawers slide open to reveal linen packets of seeds, anise, basil, hibiscus, and something labeled only in Spanish as Magia Blanca. Glass vials cradle dried spores of medicinal mushrooms. Cork-stoppered test tubes hold coarse granules of volcanic ash, prized for drawing poison from suppurating wounds. Each compartment bears a carved symbol, a crescent for calm, a lightning bolt for pain, a spiral for cleansing blood. By lamplight, he inventories the haul acquired at Port Santeloi: lavender cuttings from the convent garden, mustard seeds traded for a spool of sail thread, and a single wax-wrapped sliver of aloe gifted by Sister, 4 burns of spirit as well as skin. Gently, he slots every specimen into place, the click of wood against wood sounding like a heartbeat steadied by purpose. At dawn, the longboat ferries a small shore party to deckhands, a linguistically gifted helmsman, and the surgeon toward a verdant headland whose slopes blush crimson with flowering yucca, dew gleams on spiderwebs slung between mangrove roots. Parrots trill gossip overhead. The surgeon walks with deliberate quiet, pausing to examine a plume of scarlet hibiscus, the thrum of bees around its throat vibrating like distant drums. He instructs the party to harvest only 1/3 of any stand, leaving enough for regeneration and future wanderers. Cuttings slide into damp burlap, labeled with bits of charcoal scrawled sailcloth. When they stumble upon a spring trickling through limestone, he slips a sprig of mint into the pool, thanking the land aloud for its generosity, an old maroon custom he borrowed long ago. The crewmen mimic the gesture, unsure yet respectful, and the jungle seems to breathe easier for it. Back aboard, the surgeon transforms an unused gun port into a miniature greenhouse. Barrel staves mutely become planter boxers. Crushed oyster shells line bottoms for drainage. Topsoil arrives by bucket brigade from shore. Within hours, emerald shoots stand at attention, leaves trembling whenever cannons test fire blank salutes. In the evenings, he anchors a lantern just above the seedlings, its gentle warmth convincing them that dusk is merely a soft-spoken lull, not an end. Sailors saunter past, inhaling the subtle perfume that rises, peppery basil mingling with citrusy lemongrass, and instinctively slow their stride, as if crossing the threshold of a tranquil chapel. The surgeon smiles, noting how greenery persuades shoulders to drop and tongues to calm without a single draught poured. The floating garden proves more than aesthetic comfort. It is laboratory, pantry, and chapel combined. When a cooper scrapes his forearm on rusted iron hoops, the surgeon crushes fresh plantain leaf and packs the pulpy mass against the wound, its moist coolness stalling infection better than the hottest iron. For a helmsman plagued by night palpitations, he steeps passion flower petals in rainwater, adding a strand of star anise for sweetness. 3 sips, and the man's heartbeat slows to the measured rhythm of oars in glassy water. Even the captain inflexible as oak partakes of lime basil tonic to banish scurvy's early gum ache, conceding afterward that morale may be a form of medicine no logbook yet quantifies. Word spreads, and soon sailors volunteer to weed and water, guarding the fragile stems as fiercely as they once guarded chests of coin. Months pass, and the tiny gunport nursery evolves into a tapestry of hues. Marigold heads nod beside sage fronds, dwarf chilies flare crimson against waxy green aloe spears. The surgeon begins cross-grafting, curious if island cinnamon can take root in mainland laurel stock, documenting each attempt in meticulous ink. Day 1 bark, Union holds, scent faintly floral. Failure becomes merely another footnote on the map toward an unprecedented remedy. One stormy midnight lightning strikes the foremast, spooking crew. The next dawn he harvests charcoal from the singed wood, grinding it into antiseptic powder he blends with calendula petals. The compound seals a stubborn saber slash 2 weeks later, giving birth to new ritual. After each electrical tempest, men gather splinters for the thunder salve, convinced skyfire now safeguards their flesh. Cuisine, too, transforms under herbal influence. The cook experiments with green gunpowder, a paste of garlic, parsley, and crushed peppercorns pounded in mortar, spread thinly over salt pork before smoking. Not only does it mask rancid undertones, its antibacterial bite shortens the sick list. On feast evenings, hibiscus petals steeped in cooled grog dye the drink a soothing rose, prompting even hardened deckhands to toast to the garden before swallowing dreams in floral whispers. The surgeon facilitates these experiments, aware that palates tied to land recall memories of home memories that anchor sanity when horizons swirl indistinct. Nourishing body, story, and spirit in one swallow becomes the ship's preferred prescription. Education flourishes amid leaf and loam. On calm afternoons, the surgeon hosts herbal muster, laying specimens along a canvas strip numbered with chalk. Crew compete to pair Latin names with folk nicknames. Salvia officinalis becomes sage, or leaf of wisdom. Zingiber, officinale, ginger, or dragon's tongue. Correct answers earn dried pineapple rings. Incorrect guesses prompt gentle laughter and mnemonic tales. A gunner learns that yarrow once sealed Trojan wounds, while a powder monkey memorizes that witch hazel can shrink swelling on a powder burn. Knowledge sticks, sweetened by reward and camaraderie, weaving resilience into muscle memory. One quiet evening, the surgeon notices seedlings, trembling though no breeze stirs. He steps closer. Beneath the soil, ship's vibrations from distant cannon drills have unsettled root beds. Quickly, he orders exercises, halted. Preservation of the garden, he argues, is preservation of the crew. Unaccustomed to such deference for green life, the men obey. Curiosity softening into acceptance. They reinforce boxes with hemp netting, pad the underside with folded sail, and resume drills on lee-side decks. The incident cements a new hierarchy. Gunpowder yields, on occasion, to green leaf. For what good is victory if infection claims the spoils? Night settles, and the garden hushes into silver shadow. Lanterns extinguish one by one, leaving moonlight to trace soft outlines of basil, mint, and climbing beans. The surgeon lingers, fingertips grazing a velvety sage leaf, feeling its pulse of captured sunlight release under touch. He listens to distant surf, to timbers groaning contentedly, to the slow respiration of dozens of sleeping men drifting on herbalaced dreams. Satisfied, he closes the gunport shutter, sealing warmth and fragrance within. Let that same invisible perfume now wrap itself around you, dear listener. Breathe in peppery green, breathe out the day's dull tether. Allow thoughts to root in fertile calm, trusting that somewhere inside, a quiet garden is already unfurling, leaf by patient leaf, beneath the gentle, watchful sky. The first light of dawn creeps across the gun deck in palest gold, and the surgeon rises before the watch bell to trace those quiet beams with a fingertip, reading them the way a navigator studies the curve of a coastline. He believes every sliver of morning carries a lesson, and so today he summons 3 deckhands young raw and wide-eyed to begin an apprenticeship that will, in time, braid their fates with every splint, stitch, and whispered prayer on this wandering ship. He seats them upon overturned water kegs, sets a chipped hourglass at their feet, and tells them that a healer's craft is measured not by sand, but by the steady cadence of another's breathing. As grains descend, he has them close their eyes and match their pulse to the glass. The first rhythm they must learn, he says, is patience, for haste can spill more blood than any cutlass. When the hourglass empties, he unveils a canvas roll containing his oldest instrument's bone saw, curved bistoury, brass syringe each, etched with nicks that glint like stars in the slanted light. One by one, he places them in trembling palms, bidding the apprentices feel the balance, gauge the weight, and discern the story of every scar along the metal. The surgeon speaks softly, explaining that these scars are the tools, memories, reminders of nights when hope dangled by a single thread of catgut. He instructs them to breathe in, inhaling the metallic scent mingled with faint clove oil, then breathe out, letting go of the fear that might make a hand tremble at the crucial stroke. Around them, the ship creaks like an old tutor, adding its timber-deep baritone to the lesson. Moving aft, he leads the trio to the greenhouse gunport, where the garden chest glows emerald in the newborn light. Here, he plucks a sprig of bruised basil and a coil of fever grass, inviting the apprentices to crush each between thumb and forefinger. He bids them memorize aroma, texture, the way basil reveals peppery warmth, while fever grass yields citrus calm. Knowledge, he tells them, is a compass dial with 2 needles, one pointing to flesh, the other to leaf, and true healing demands that both align. They practice binding plantain poultices across carved turnips, the leaves, juices seeping into pale vegetable flesh like bright ink upon parchment. The surgeon watches, correcting posture, adjusting thumb pressure, praising the slow, deliberate movements that promise mastery of gentleness. After breakfast, he converts the wardroom table into an anatomy chart, arranging pig ribs beside driftwood splinters, ox sinew next to frayed hemp rope. Each pairing illustrates the body-ship metaphor: ribs as hull beams, sinew as rigging, blood as bilge that must be kept flowing yet contained. He encourages the apprentices to think like carpenters of marrow and sailors of muscle, to imagine that a fractured ulna is a snapped yardarm requiring lashings, wedges, and patient alignment before full sail can fly again. They listen, rapt, as he recounts the night he reset a captain's collarbone beneath a lantern guttering in monsoon wind, the cabin's bulkheads groaning like wounded lungs with every swell. Through story, he transfers not only technique, but the emotional cartography of crisis, how to steer courage through chaos. Mid-afternoon finds them on the pontoon, its surface lazily rising and falling with the sea's breath. The surgeon lines the apprentices shoulder to shoulder, arms outstretched, each balancing a shallow bowl of water. He commands them to squat, pivot, and rise without spilling a drop, an exercise in steadiness that he calls the still ocean. He reminds them that a surgeon's hands must echo this calm during an amputation in rolling seas, during the lancing of a boil when thunder prowls overhead, during the delicate threading of a needle when a shipmate's scream ricochets in blood-slick corridors. The bowls tremble, water beads over rims, but soon the men find their center, and the ripples smooth into mirrored discs. Their smiles, small but bright, confirm the lesson's weight. As sunset bleeds coral and violet along the horizon, the surgeon unveils a battered ledger, his silent companion since his first apprentice days amid Spanish galleons. Its pages, foxed and salt-stained, record triumphs and failures in equal script. He lets each youngster read a single entry: a miraculous recovery from gangrene after maggot therapy, a poignant failure when sepsis outpaced his crude quinine, a rare moment of doubt when he almost deserted his calling out of grief. He explains that the ledger is not confession, but compensates errors pointing due north toward humility, its successes pointing south toward confidence, and the pages between marking east and west where curiosity and caution orbit like twin stars. He tasks them with starting their own ledgers tonight, urging honesty over heroics, reflection over rhetoric. Night deepens, and under a canopy of indigo he leads them to the mainmast's base, where a small brazier glows like a heart embanked in iron. He sprinkles sage and dried orange peel onto the coals, sending ribbons of fragrant smoke into the air. Around this aromatic spiral he introduces the breath circle, an oath taken not in words but in shared rhythm. The four men inhale together for 6 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 8, repeating until their chests move as one slow tide. When the pace settles, the surgeon finally speaks. A healer is a map, a refuge, and a promise. They are to carry forward not only poultice and blade, but gentleness enough to cradle terror like a wounded bird until that terror flies free. The apprentices nod, eyes shining in the flicker, vows sealed in silence thicker than any ink, to anchor the lesson in tactile memory. He ends with the ritual of needle and knot. Each apprentice chooses a length of catgut and a curved needle, then follows his demonstration, suturing 2 ends of linen until the seam is near invisible. The task is deceptively simple. The linen tears if tension wavers, the thread snarls if patience fractures. The surgeon hovers beside each, offering neither rebuke nor premature praise, only a quiet presence that bolsters resolve. When final knots tie off, he snips excess thread, pressing the tiny loops against the apprentice's fingertips, so they may memorize the feel of closure and echo, of sealing fear, sealing pain, sealing the covenant between healer and healed. Before dismissing them to hammocks, he returns to the hourglass, inverts it, and sets it beside a guttering lantern. He bids the apprentices watch until the last grain falls, and to note how the lantern, too, will dim with the final particle of sand. Together, hourglass and flame teach the last secret of the compass. Time and light are partners in every intervention. Hesitate to long and light ebbs, hasten too much and time slips unmeasured. In that delicate balance lies the true north of compassion. He leaves them to contemplate, stepping softly toward his cabin as the ship hums beneath twinkling vaults. Finally, alone with moonlit quill, the surgeon records the day's passage in his own ledger. 3 hearts charted, 3 compasses set. He sets the book aside, listens to the distant creak of hammocks as apprentices drift toward sleep, and offers a silent benediction. May their hands stay steady. May their ledgers stay honest. May their compass ever point to mercy. Let the same prayer settle over you now. Dear traveler of words, breathe slow. Feel the hush pool around your ribcage, and allow your own compass to rest at calm. Out beyond your closed eyelids, stars guide every wandering ship. Inside, quiet purpose guides each pulse toward gentle dreams. The hush before dawn settles over the ship like a silken shroud, muting even the gulls that wheel above the pale horizon. Faintest daylight seeps between the seams of the mainsail, casting long bars of rose gold across the planks where dew glitters like stardust stranded by night's retreat. In that fragile stillness, the surgeon stands barefoot, feeling the heartbeat of the vessel in each gentle rise and fall beneath his soles. He closes his eyes and counts the slow exhalations of the sea. 1, 2, 3, synchronizing his pulse with the water's ancient metronome. All around him, hammocks sway with sleepers' breaths, and the faint creak of rope sounds almost like the opening note of a symphony yet to begin. He inhales the mingled scents of tar, lavender, and ripening citrus from the garden chest, then opens his eyes to greet the new day as if it were a patient stirring from deep, restorative slumber. With sunrise comes movement, soft at first. A powder monkey pads across the deck to coil lines, humming a half-remembered shanty. A gunner stretches wounded limbs beneath the awning of the floating infirmary, joints popping like distant kettle drums. The surgeon pays close attention to these modest sounds, for he has learned that recovery is less an event than a rhythmous, subtle cadence woven through everyday tasks. He begins his rounds by striking a small bronze bell, its tone bright yet gentle, summoning convalescents to morning muster. No barked commands, no parade ground formality, only that single, resonant chime pulsing through salt-washed air, calling each man to join the living chorus. As they assemble, bleary but smiling, he senses the invisible threads of shared purpose tightening, tuning the crew like strings upon a lute. The day's first exercise is simple, walking the perimeter of the main deck in measured tempo, feet padding, heel to toe along chalk lines sketched at sunrise. The surgeon leads, setting a pace neither hurried nor languid, encouraging each follower to match his strides exactly, building muscle memory and camaraderie in tandem. Around and around they go beneath billowing sails, a quiet parade whose music is the rhythmic tap of souls and the whispered encouragements traded between friends. With every lap, shoulders square, spines lengthen, and the chorus of footfalls grows steadier, proof that bodies knit by stitch and salve can relearn the grammar of motion. Overhead, gulls provide fluttering counterpoint, while the sea, ever patient, keeps time with its own watery bass. When the sun climbs higher, the surgeon transforms the deck into an open-air studio of improvised instruments. Empty water kegs become booming drums. Copper ladles strike the rims of iron pots to produce clear, ringing notes. Bundles of hempline, plucked taut between belaying pins, hum like rustic violins. He divides the crew into small ensembles, assigning each man an instrument matched to his current strength. The recuperating carpenter, whose hands still tremble lightly, receives a gentle shaker made from a gourd filled with dried peppercorns, while the powerfully mended bosun pounds a barrel drum, channeling his regained vigor through resonant skin. The surgeon raises a hand, cues a steady pulse-padam. Padam, the deckside orchestra, launches into experimental song, laughter rippling through every measure. Music, he explains between beats, is medicine that seeps beyond flesh into marrow of spirit. The vibrations coursing through palms and rib cages stimulate circulation. Synchronized breathing fosters unspoken empathy, and the playful competition of tempo hones cognitive agility, dulled by weeks of bed rest. As melodies take shape, some jaunty, some haunting, the surgeon strolls among the players, adjusting a hammock strap to tighten pitch, or dampening a pot's clang with a swatch of linen until it rings mellow and warm. He congratulates the timid when their first tentative strikes find harmony, and he hails the bold when they improvise flourishes that make the whole deck sway with delight. Soon, even the most stoic sailor keeps time by tapping boot against planks, unable to resist the gravitational pull of rhythm. After rehearsal, he gathers the orchestra beneath the shade of the forecastle and administers another, quieter treatment, the pulse check. One by one, each musician extends a wrist, and the surgeon measures heartbeats, still echoing with percussive vigor. He notes how drum players' pulses throb, strong and regular, how gourd shakers' beats flutter lightly but evenly, how the ladle strikers reveal a pulse that slows from frenetic to calm within half a minute. These readings become data points in his ever-growing ledger of recovery metrics, the sound of resilience translated into arterial Morse code. He shares the results aloud, framing them as accolades, and watches pride bloom in eyes once glazed with fatigue. Midday heat settles thick and humid, so he orders a cool respite. All instruments down, hammocks up. The ensemble now, a sweaty, grinning jumble, retreats to the shade, where pitchers of hibiscus lime cordial await. As they drink, the surgeon teaches a colander response, lullaby learned from Arawak healers, a lilting minor key that mimics waves lapping hidden coves. Each call is sung by those still strong of lung, each response by voices softer, recovering range. The interplay of timbres swirls beneath the canvas awnings, coaxing eyelids to droop and heart rates to nestle into restful troughs. Even listeners far from the deck would sense the hush settling like a downy blanket, proof that rest is not absence of activity, but its necessary counterweight in the rhythm of repair. When shadows lengthen, lessons resume with balance quartets. 4 sailors stand at compass points around a mast, each holding a slender bamboo rod. At the surgeon's signal, they begin to pass the rods clockwise, then counterclockwise, adjusting speed to maintain unbroken flow. A stumble here means the entire quartet feels the jolt. A flawless round elicits cheers that skitter up the rigging like climbing larks. This exercise, deceptively playful, rewires reflexes dulled by convalescence and reinstates trust between shipmates, whose lives may soon depend on split-second coordination during reefing or battle. Watching from the quarterdeck, the surgeon marks each success with a quiet nod, understanding that every smooth pass is a thread weaving the crew back into a single resilient fabric. As twilight ignites the sky in copper and mauve, the deckside orchestra reconvenes for a grand performance offered to the sea itself. Sailors line the rails, instruments poised, lanterns flicker to life, scattering constellations across polished barrels and cymbal-bright pots. The surgeon lifts both hands, and a hush falls that seems to still even the waves. On the downbeat drums, thunder, ladles chime, and hemp strings drone in earthy resonance. The music surges and ebbs with practiced precision, yet underneath the artistry hums the deeper score of collective healing, lungs expanding without pain, fingers gripping drumsticks with restored confidence, minds firing across neural pathways revitalized by rhythm and camaraderie. The anthem rises to a jubilant crescendo, then fades into a breathless diminuendo, leaving only the ocean's applause in its wake. Night enfolds the ship, but the day's music lingers, soft echoes alive in muscle memory and quiet smiles. The surgeon makes one last circuit, checking bandages, dosing a few with lavender balm, sliding pulse count beads along their cords in satisfaction. He pauses beneath the garden gunport, inhaling herb-rich air, and feels the ship sway in perfect time with his own steady heartbeat. Satisfied that the rhythms of recovery are well rooted, he dims the final lantern and whispers a benediction that drifts across deck, through rigging, and into the moon-silvered sea. May those same rhythms find you now, listener. Let your breath align with distant drums. Let your pulse slow to the hush of waves, and surrender to sleep on currents of gentle, abiding song. A velvet hush blankets the decks as midnight approaches. The only sounds the low whisper of slack rigging and the rhythmic lap of water against hull soft-spoken, calming intervals that lull even the lookout toward drowsy stillness. Clouds, moon-swaddled and harmless, drift overhead like lazy frigates, and the scent of rosemary from the greenhouse gunport mingles with cooling tar, an aromatic sleep aid that soothes muscles and minds alike. Hammocks sway in gentle counterpoint, crewmen breathing in chorus, while the surgeon sits cross-legged beneath the binnacle lamp, copying herbal ratios into his leather ledger. Each scratch of quill is a lullaby in miniature, promising help with sleep to the weary souls who trust his steady hand. Yet beyond the placid horizon, a dark seam ripples across the sky, an abrupt crease hinting at storms, stitched by unseen giants. The surgeon lifts his head, pulse unconsciously counting out the ship's calm before the coming roar. The first gust arrives as a sharp, almost impatient slap against the foresail, snapping canvas and jolting sleepers awake. Lightning forks across the heavens, a brief, blinding diagram of danger, and thunder answers like distant cannon. Deckhands tumble from hammocks, scrambling for stations, while the surgeon's apprentices sprint toward the sickba, instincts forged by earlier lessons flaring bright. Rain follows thick, wind-driven sheets drumming on planks with relentless cadence, transforming the open gun deck into a glistening stage where chaos and discipline must dance together. Above the tumult, the surgeon's voice rises, deep but soft-spoken, issuing measured orders that slice through panic without adding to it. Fetch stretchers, unlash tourniquets, warm the cautery irons. Even as the ship heals dramatically, the cadence of his narration stays calm, a vocal keel keeping every mind from capsizing into fear. A crack like musket fire echoes as the foretopmast shatters, sending a jagged spar tumbling across the deck. 2 sailors take its weight, one with a fractured clavicle, the other pinned beneath splintered wood that gouges thigh to bone. Salt water and blood mingle in pink rivulets, swirling toward the scuppers as wind howls overhead. The surgeon kneels in knee-deep water, lantern clenched between teeth, and performs triage by touch. Warm skin signals salvage. Waxen pallor urges speed. Apprentices stabilize the first patient with a board splint lashed by reef netslow, deliberate motions recalling the morning's still ocean. Drill while the surgeon frees the second, saw biting through oak as thunder booms, like an impatient drum. Pain-numbing rum and clove oil flood the wounded man's senses, his eyes glazing into a dazed calm that lets the narration of care drift in like a gentle tide, easing terror where morphine cannot reach. Inside the swaying sickbay, the storm's roar dulls to muffled percussion, rain hammering the bulkheads in wild rhythm. Lanterns swing from beams, scattering jittery constellations across scalpels and salve jars. Yet the apprentices move with balletic poise, the dexadorchestra drills of earlier still thrumming in muscle memory. One lad chants the beat of the morning drum patum while unpacking garden chest leaves of yarrow to staunch bleeding. Another steadies a trembling syringe, recalling the compass lesson of breath circle. Inhale 6, hold 2, exhale 8. Their calm, contagious, ripples outward, coaxing groans into slow breaths, turning frantic eyes toward dim hope. Over everything flows the surgeon's narrations, soft, steady, a sleep aid for a deck in agony tailing each suture pass, each artery tie, teaching while healing so knowledge, like lifeboats, multiplies in crisis. An unexpected wave bursts through the gunport, dousing bandages and rattling pewter basins across the deck. For a heartbeat panic flares, but the surgeon raises a gloved hand and hums a low note from the Arawak lullaby taught by Sister L-prentices. Join their voices, weaving a calming harmony against wind's discord. Wounded men, half-conscious, murmur in response, breaths synchronizing with the tune. While rainwater drains away, the surgeon boils his thundersalve charcoal with marigold petals in a tin cup balanced over a spirit lamp, steam curling like incense. He spreads the black gold paste across the ragged thigh wound, sealing flesh beneath aromatic warmth. The patient eyes half-lidded, whispers of home shores and candlelit dinners, memories unlocked by the soft-spoken sentence, another testament to narrative medicine guiding mind far from present pain. Above, lightning rends the sky again, illuminating apprentices hauling buckets to catch leaks now dribbling through hatch seams. They line the sickbay perimeter with barrels, the rhythmic plink of drops forming a countermelody to rain's roar, creating accidental music that steadies frayed nerves. Between tasks, they trade quiet affirmations, stitches even, pulse, strong, iodine ready. The surgeon, meanwhile, faces his gravest testagunner, whose ribs lie shattered beneath bruised lung, breath gurgling in foamy gasps. With deft motion, he inserts a slender brass trocar, releasing trapped blood and granting the lung fragile space to bloom. A hiss escapes, not unlike a teakettle settling, and the gunner's breaths lengthen, eyelids fluttering in grateful surrender. Outside, thunder rolls on, but inside, the stillness after crisis rings louder, a hush that feels almost holy. Hours creep past, sails reefed, helm secured, the ship rides the gale rather than fights it. The surgeon's team cycles through patients, replacing soaked dressings with dry linen warmed beneath a brazier shielded from drafts. They feed survivors spoonfuls of ginger citrus broth, its steam scented with mint, soft-spoken invitation for stomachs to settle and bodies to resume their quiet labor of mending. In a corner, a carpenter scribbles ledger notes in shaky hand, recording dosages and pulse counts learned just days before. The act of writing becomes its own kind of sleep aid, taming chaotic memories into neat, legible rows. Through an open hatch, a faint dawn glow seeps in, painting every exhausted face with hopeful rose. When the storm finally limps eastward, trailing ragged banners of cloud, the deck emerges littered but intact. Broken spars jut like fallen monuments. Pools of rainwater mirror the pale, calming sky. The surgeon leads his apprentices on post-storm rounds. They count sutures, check tourniquet tension, and refill tincture flasks. Their movements unhurried now that danger has withdrawn. He praises them softly, no triumphant boasts, only the warm gravity of shared survival before handing each a fresh page for their ledgers. Write the wind's lesson, he murmurs, how a calm voice can outsing thunder. They nod, eyes old with fatigue, yet bright with earned belief, then set quill to parchment, their cramped words mapping new continents of competence. By full sunrise, hammocks once again cradle-breathing forms, and the surgeon climbs to the quarterdeck alone, surveying bruised clouds sliding away. He exhales, sensing his own heartbeat match the sea's gentler cadence, every pulse a quiet benediction. Below, apprentices snuff lanterns, the smell of spent oil mingling with lavender and lingering ozone. Tools gleam clean, bandages restocked, garden plants shaken free of salt spray. All is ready for the next voyage, yet, for this fleeting moment, the ship, crew, and sky exist in rare equilibrium, a lull carved from chaos. The surgeon closes his tired eyes, offers thanks to wind and wave alike, and lets the hush wash through him, a soft tide promising restful drift. And so, dear listener, allow the echoes of that midnight tempest to fade beyond your own horizon. Feel the surgeon's calm narration settle around you like the warm weight of woolen blanket, guiding each breath to slow, gentle rhythm. Imagine lantern-lit miracles glimmering in the dark, the storm's fury tamed by song, by steady hands, by compassion's bright compass. Let those images become your own deckside lullaby, rocking you toward steady, restorative dream-proof that even in the fiercest gale, quiet courage can stitch every sundered thread back into a tapestry of serene, unbroken night. The dawn, after the tempest, breaks over a sea smoothed to polished glass, and the surgeon greets it with a thin smile that carries equal parts relief and resolve. He unclasps his ledger, now swollen with storm-soaked pages, and spreads them on the quarterdeck rail to dry in the newborn light. Across margins sprawl sketched pulses, fever graphs, and terse notes, tiny constellations of ink-linking pain to remedy. But he senses a deeper pattern waiting to be coaxed into shape. So, while most of the crew dozes in exhausted slumber, he fetches a clean sheaf of vellum and begins a new project, a chart of blood and breath, an almanac meant to translate the scattered beats of individual hearts into a single, harmonious map of the ship's living rhythm. Each line he draws is steady, deliberate, accompanied by the soft rush of tide beneath the hull-calming metronome guiding quill across page as surely as it steadied scalpel through flesh the night before. By mid-morning the deck comes alive with hushed footfalls, and the surgeon summons 10 volunteers, selecting a tapestry of ages, builds, and temperaments. One by one, he takes their pulses at wrist and neck, timing beats against a small sandglass, while they breathe in measured cadence. 4 counts inhale, 6 counts exhale, just as he taught them during the breath circle oath. Beside each reading, he notes complexion, tongue hue, and the faint scent of exhalation, for he believes illness announces itself first in the subtleties of breath before it blooms into cough or fever. He records how the barrel-chested gunner's respirations rumble like distant surf, how the lean rigger's pulse flutters quick as a tern's wing, how the ship's cook carries the buttery aroma of last night's chowder on every sigh. These details, mundane yet intimate, weave themselves into his chart like tiny compass roses, orienting future care toward each sailor's personal north. Next, he unpacks a lacquered cedar casa acquisition from a Portuguese trader and reveals delicate glass phials etched with moon phases. Into these, he collects sparse samples of morning urine, adding drops of rosemary tincture that coax hidden colors forward beneath full sunlight. Pale straw indicates balanced humors, rose tinge suggests mild scurvy's return, and the troubling, shadowed amber of the helmsman hints at infection still smoldering beneath stitched flesh. The surgeon swirls each vial, watching hues shift like tropical shoals beneath a passing cloud, before cataloging the findings in neat columns alongside pulse notations. This spectacle, half alchemy, half science, fascinates his apprentices, who lean close despite pungent fumes. He gently reminds them that learning often smells sharp before wisdom ripens sweet. Soft laughter follows, and the tension left by last night's gale loosens another invisible knot. With vitals recorded, he guides the volunteers to the pontoon clinic, where sunlight dances on rippled water and a faint breeze threads rosemary and salt through the air, nature's own sleep aid for nerves still tight. There, he demonstrates the breath lantern, a simple device, a narrow-necked bottle warmed slightly, its mouth capped with a parchment membrane dusted in soot. Each sailor exhales into the flask. Healthy lungs leave only faint rings, while compromised chests speckle the soot with damp, spreading blooms. The apprentices watch the patterns appear, ghostly blossoms of moisture, then render them in charcoal sketches to paste into the growing chart. Over time, these silhouettes of breath will provide a twilight forest of lungs, each tree's rings telling stories of storms braved and calms restored. The process is quiet, almost meditative, punctuated only by the lap of waves and the surgeon's soft-spoken encouragements. Afternoon shadows slant across the deck as he unveils the final element of his almanac, sound. He seats the same 10 men in a semicircle and places a hollow koa-wood drum at the center, membrane tightened with fresh hide. Beginning with his own chest, he asks each sailor to tap a steady rhythm over sternum, while he listens through a carved mahogany ear trumpet, a crude stethoscope but effective. The low resonance of healthy lungs thrums clean and even. Pockets of congestion thud dull, like rain on sodden canvas. He matches each sound to a corresponding symbol-open circle for clarity, half moon for mild rattle, jagged star for alarming wheeze, then inks these glyphs beside pulse, color, and breath silhouettes. Soon the vellum blooms into a multisensory atlas, a living score of physiology where no note stands isolated. The apprentices, seeing science turn musical, realize healing can be read like sheet music, tempo, key, dynamics, all guiding the next intervention's melody. With data gathered, the surgeon invites the volunteers to the galley for a reward. Bowls of chilled citrus ginger soup, brightened by mint from the garden chest. As they eat, he explains the chart's deeper purpose, not merely to react to crises, but to predict them, to sense the faint offbeat before the full drum of disease. He describes how a slight shift in breath lantern rings might forecast a lung fever 2 days early, how a changed drum note could warn of pleurisy before pain steals voice. Such foresight, he says, is a compass truer than any star, steering a healer through unseen shoals. The crew listens, slurping soup, their faces earnest in lantern glow. Even the cook pauses, ladle in midair, struck by the notion that the body sings its own shanty long before it cries out. Evening descends in lavender hush, and the surgeon gathers parchment vials and instruments into a compact chest lined with felt his atlas case. He entrusts it to the apprentices with solemn ceremony, reminding them that charts matter only when consulted, updated, and believed. To fix the lesson, he assigns each a watch. At the first bell of every shift, they must note the ship's ambient choir, the clack of blocks, the hiss of wind, the cadence of footsteps, and compare it to the crew's internal music captured on vellum. If the external rhythm veers sharp, tempers may flare. If footsteps drag a rhythmic fever, or fatigue could be prowling. Thus, the vessel itself becomes a stethoscope, its timbers translating human health into creaks and groans. The apprentices accept their charge with reverence, feeling the weight of knowledge neither rigid nor burdensome, but alive, pulsing. When stars prick the firmament, the surgeon climbs to the forecastle rail, almanac tucked beneath arm, and gazes at constellations mirrored faintly in placid water. He charts one more datum, the steady expansion of his own lungs, cooled by night air, and adds it silently to the mosaic forming in his mind. He thinks of how the ship's pulse echoed last night's thunder, how today it softened to lullaby, and how tomorrow it may quicken again. Yet, with the almanac, those changes will speak plainly rather than scream. He exhales slowly, watching his breath ghost across starlight, and allows the well-learned fatigue to seep through sinew and bone, replacing vigilance with gentle drowse. From the quarterdeck below, he hears the apprentices practicing quiet drum taps, soap and circle beats, in lulling 3/4 time already, keeping watch over the crew's unseen tides. Finally, he descends the companionway, storing quill and ink, and dims the sickbed lanterns to ember glow. Hammocks breathe around him, each rise and fall a stanza in the broader deckside symphony. He closes his eyes, trusting the new chart to guide hands and hopes alike, and surrenders to sleep's soft harbor, where dreams unfurl like silent sails. May you, too, dear listener, feel your own pulse aligning with that calm deck rhythm, slow, sure, serene, guided by an inner compass of compassion and the quiet conviction that every breath you take writes another soothing line upon the secret almanac of your night. The moon hangs low and vast tonight, a milky coin drifting just above the spar tips, and its pale light stains the ocean glassy white all around the ship. In that hush, just before the 4th bell of the graveyard watch, the surgeon wakes to an eerie humming that seems to seep from the planks themselves, an undulating minor chord, delicate as spun glass, yet cold enough to raise gooseflesh. He lies in his cot a moment, eyes wide, listening to discern whether the sound is mere wind in the shrouds or something stranger. Stories whispered on earlier voyages surface in his mind, tales of phantom siren shadows, whose melodies lure restless crew over rails into dark water. He dismisses superstition, but recognizes the greater truth beneath it. After gales and bloodletting, minds adrift can weave danger from any stray sound. So he rises, slips barefooted onto the deck, and inhales the sweet brine air, calm but alert, determined to soothe whatever haunted chords have begun to vibrate. By the time dawn uncurls rosy fingers along a cloudless rim, 6 sailors have reported the same spectral tune. One swore he glimpsed a ripple shaped like a woman's arm beckoning from the wake. The surgeon gathers these men beneath the foremast, noting pallid complexions and pupils dilated with half fear, half wonder, the way children stare at flickering embers. He names their malaise, noctilucent echo, a blending of fatigue, barometric change, and the ship's own harmonic resonance after recent repairs. With steady voice, he explains how timbers dry unevenly after storm soak, how ropes shrink, how wind eddies through new gaps to birth uncanny music. Knowledge, he reminds them, is the first antidote to dread. As they listen, shoulders loosen fractionally, some even chuckle at their gullibility. But the tune lingers, faint as a held breath, and he knows deeper ministrations will be needed before night drapes its black cloak again. He begins by charting the vessel's acoustic realm, pacing every deck and hold with a tuning fork raised like a candle against the dark. At each bulkhead, he strikes the fork, presses its stem to wood, and listens for sympathetic vibration. Where the hum amplifies, he chalks a star on the planks. In the empty powder magazine, low frequencies shiver like distant organ pipes. Near the freshwater casks, higher notes ring child bright. Apprentices trail him, sketching a sound map that soon resembles a celestial chart flung across the ship's blueprint. Midway through the exercise, the mysterious chord resolves, a convergence of 3 marked nodes, the forepeak, the galley stovepipe, and a cracked strake near the mizzen. When wind aligns just so, these points form a phantom harp, plucking nerves raw. Revelation sparks relief, but also plan. If resonance can wound, harmonious silence can heal. First, he tends to architecture. Carpenters smear pine pitch into the cracked strake, sanding it smooth until the grain sighs silently beneath their palms. The galley stovepipe is fitted with a collar of braided rope and beeswax that dampens whistle to a whisper. In the forepeak, he hangs burlap sacks filled with dried seagrass natural baffles that swallow errant echoes like moss blankets a bell. But treatment must reach inside men as surely as it seals planks. So the surgeon inaugurates the quiet quarters, a circle of hammocks slung low around the garden gunport, every rope wrapped in soft cloth to mute creak. He places conch shells at each pillow. When held to ear, they reproduce the sea's own perpetual hush, a reminder that not all voices from water are lures. Along the beams, he pins sprigs of mugwort and lavender, whose mingling scents thicken the air with gentle, earthy calm. The space becomes a sanctuary stitched from light, leaf, and muffled tide. At twilight, he convenes those still troubled by phantom songs, seating them cross-legged upon reed mats sprinkled with rosemary needles that release fragrance under warmth. He begins a slow, rhythmic breathing session. Inhale 4, hold 2, exhale 6, then introduces what he calls the lantern pulse. Each sailor cradles a shuttered lamp. On every outbreath, they open the slats for one heartbeat, casting a brief star of gold into the gloom before lighting it again. Soon, the deck flickers with synchronized constellations, light surfacing and sinking like measured heartbeats, reinforcing steadiness through sight as breath does through lungs. Over this subtle choreography, the surgeon hums, a low drone pitched to the natural resonance of human thoraxa. Note that feels more felt than heard, vibrating collarbones, dissolving residual tremors. After a dozen cycles, shoulders droop. The haunting melody has no foothold amid this orchestrated calm. Yet he knows memory is stubborn, returning unbidden in small hours, when vigilance slackens. Thus he pairs acoustic stillness with tactile engagement, prescribing the netweaver's meditation. On mid-morning watches, crew gather near the capstan to knot segments of frayed hemp into intricate mesh. Each twist follows the cadence of a calming chant: cross, loop, breathe, tighten. Fingers learn the pattern by muscle, giving distracted minds an anchor. Knots glide into place like constellations tethering sky to sea. The finished nets will reinforce railings weakened by storm, but their larger purpose is internal each junction, tying wild thought to deliberate action. Apprentices observe how even the most anxious sailor's breath steadies within 10 knots, proof that serenity can be woven as surely as rope. 3 nights later, a squall skirts the horizon, and wind gusts test the surgeon's repairs. The dreaded cord attempts a faltering return, but meets dampened timbers, muffled stove, and living walls of seagrass. It breaks apart like foam against breakwater. On deck, sailors pause mid-task, ears tilted, then grin when only normal creaks reply. To celebrate, the surgeon invites the improvised deckside orchestra to play a new composition, the siren's lullaby reclaimed. Barrel drums thump, heartbeats low. Ladle chimes shimmer, gentle as rain on palm leaves, and hemp strings offer a warm drone that outlasts every gust. The music is not loud, it is intentional, sewing threads of chosen sound over the tatters left by the storm. When it ends, the night feels fuller, not with noise, but with a comforting absence of menace. Silence become ally, not void. With crisis past, he gathers apprentices beneath dim lanterns to inscribe the episode into the atlas case. They catalog cause, tri-point resonance after spar replacement, and remedy, triangulated dampening plus guided breath lantern ritual. But the surgeon pushes them deeper. What emotional currents fed fear? How did shared ritual convert dread to composure? Discussion blooms, and they conclude that the true siren was not song but solitude, each man's private worry amplified in dark. Community, they write, is counterspell, its chorus drowning whispered illusions. Their quills scratch long into midnight, penning insights that will steer future healers through unseen shoals. When pages dry, they coat them in a wash of rosemary water, scenting memory with calm forever after. The surgeon closes the atlas and steps onto the moonlit deck. Now quiet in the ordinary way, rope groan, gull cry, water hush, he senses a softness inside the hull, as though the entire vessel exhales contentedly after long-held breath. Touching the rail, he imagines pulse lines running through oak and iron, aligned at last with the steady beats captured in his earlier chart of blood and breath. Sea and ship and crew form a single organism whose heart he can almost hear, low and sure beneath his palm. He murmurs gratitude to wind for its lessons, to silence for its healing, then turns toward his cabin, the new calm folding over him like a well-worn blanket. Permit that same calm to drape over you now, listener. Let phantom anxieties dissolve into the quiet between waves. Feel each inhale fill sails with soft night air, each exhale lower anchor into restful depths. Imagine the hush of conch shells, the glow of lantern pulses, the secure weave of nets binding loose thoughts. Allow the ship's reclaimed silence rich, intentional, protective to cradle you through dreaming seas, where siren shadows hold no sway, and every breath is a gentle or pulling you deeper into serene, untroubled sleep. The equatorial sun rose like a forge-bright coin, branding the horizon with molten gold and turning every deck plank to a slow simmering griddle. Even seasoned buccaneers, leather-browned and salt-cured, felt their pulse quicken beneath the relentless blaze. Sweat beaded, evaporated, and returned in new rivulets that tasted of copper and exhaustion. The surgeon, sensing a different kind of battlefront unfurling, paused his dawn rounds to study the light, not merely its glare, but its weight on lungs and blood. He watched how the radiance bent sword blades into shimmering mirages, how tar softened and perfumed the air with dizzying fumes, how lips cracked on sentences left half-spoken. Then he ducked below to unpack a chest seldom used outside the tropics. Vials of tamarind pulp, salt-balanced barley water, indigo-stained silk umbrellas, and small cones of alum for binding sweat-opened pores. The day, he understood, would be a lesson in heatcraft, an alchemy wrought not with flame and bellows, but with patience, shadow, and water coaxed into staying. He began by lowering coarse canvas awnings across the weather deck, transforming exposed planks into a patchwork of moving shade. Sailors reveled in the sudden dusk-blue islands, their sighs of relief wafting like cooled spice. Yet the surgeon saw beyond comfort. Shade slowed dehydration, yes, but it also dulled vigilance. He ordered barrels of faintly briny water rolled beside every gunport and mixed each with a finger-wide swirl of sweetened lime, the tang sharp enough to jolt tongues awake. Apprentices measured careful pinches of sea salt into cups, no more than 2 grains per palm width, to replace what sweat robbed away, and they taught crew a chant to drink by. Sip, swallow, breathe, repeat, a cadence sinking throat and lungs, so the act of hydrating became almost meditative. Each man, cupping the cool tin, felt the sun's crushing hand ease on his chest, as though someone had cracked open the day and poured in a breeze. Next, the surgeon unveiled his sky mirrors, shallow basins lined with hammered tin, filled with water iced 2 nights earlier during a lucky squall, then covered until now in sawdust-insulated crates. He positioned these basins at compass points along the deck, letting them flash shards of reflected light back into the heavens, tricking the sun into conversing with its own image and sparing skin below. Sailors scoffed at first, calling the contraptions vanity pools, but an hour later the measurable drop in deck temperature silenced ridicule. More than one gunner, caught staring into the trembling silver surface, reported feeling a coolness leak from eyes to spine, a private well of shade summoned from mere reflection. The surgeon smiled, noting how psychology and physics braided together. The mind, convinced it beheld water, told blood to flow slower, heartbeats to lengthen, heat to disperse like gossip into the wind. Yet even mirrored water and lime salt drafts could not fully tame the sun. By noon, a powder monkey staggered against the capstan, pupils blown wide as fired cannon, pulse racing like drum rolls gone wild. The surgeon laid him beneath the broadest awning, stripped away sweat-stiff clothes, and brushed crushed cucumber pulp mixed with aloe across blazing skin. Over jugular and ankles, he placed cool river stones, wrapped in damp linen borrowed from the surgeon's garden chest, now fragrant with minty chill to coax inner temperature downward without shocking the heart. He massaged wrists in slow spirals, whispering the breath circle count, and the powder monkey's tremors eased, breath stretching into longer ribbons. Around them, apprentices measured time not in minutes, but in sighs. Each deeper exhale marked a degree of fever retreating, each fluttering eyelid the sun losing one more fingerhold on flesh. The crisis spurred redesigns. Carpenters raised a lattice of bamboo over the floating infirmary, weaving palm fronds for living roofing that exhaled moisture from still green veins. Beneath this leafy ceiling, recovered sailors practiced what the surgeon called the heat tide, a slow-motion sequence of stretches paired with sips of barley tamarind cordial. Arms rose with inhale, gathering heat like nets. They lowered on exhale, shaking wrists to fling the captured warmth away. The rhythm of silent tide lulled hearts into steady cadence. Watching from the shade, the surgeon felt the deck's collective temperature shift from frantic simmer to contented stew. Hot, yes, but manageable. A climate shared rather than suffered. He sketched the sequence in his ledger, titling it Thermal Fugue, a choreography of survival that future crews might dance when the sun hammered too loudly on brass and bone. As afternoon lengthened, he turned to the opposite element, salt, ever present in sea and sweat. It could be villain or savior, depending on its drift. He brewed a brackish soup of fish bones, kelp, and a single fiery chili salt, enough to lure water back into thirsty blood, spice enough to spark appetite dulled by heat haze. He served small bowls thrice hourly, monitoring tongues for return of pink and checking capillary refill by pressing nail beds until they blanched and observing the flush of color rebound. Each test became conversation. Each conversation, a subtle check on mental clarity, for heatstroke blurs thought long before it stills heart. Crew soon recognized the ritual as both meal and meditation. They swallowed broth slowly, feeling salt's electric welcome in every cell, and they let the surgeon read their nails like fortune-tellers read palms, trusting the color to tell truths they themselves could not yet articulate. Evening's approach promised respite, but the day held one more trial. A cannon touched by sun and left unattended burned a sailor's palm to blistering white. The surgeon sliced a cool leaf of aloe, split it to reveal glassy gel, and dripped its juice over the burst skin, whispering a saint-doming charm. feudehors.com, Dudon, fire without, calm within. He wrapped the wound not in cloth, but in a thin sheath of softened banana leaf, pliant and antibacterial, then bound it with twisted hibiscus fiber. The patient, eyes bright with shock momentarily replaced by wonder, said the bandage felt like clasping a living hand dipped in river water. The surgeon smiled. Nature, he'd long believed, kept answers for every cruelty it devised. One need only watch how a green shoot broke scorched earth, or how night cooled even the most hellish day. When the red sun finally slipped into violet sea, it left behind a deck gleaming with melted pitch, empty basins, and sailors stripped to linen breeches, humming low, satisfied tunes. The surgeon surveyed his domain. No sunstroke deaths, minimal delirium, one bad burn, soothed and sleeping. Success tasted like warm copper, but aromatic with mint. He gathered apprentices beneath a lantern shaped like an 8-point compass and recorded the day's gleanings. Heat conquers quick, but shade, salt, and stillness build a fortress. Mirrors may outstare the sky. Water must be courted, not gulped. It flees rough handling. He bade each apprentice pen their own line, forging memory through ink. Together they folded the pages into the atlas case, now thicker by another map of practiced mercy. Night descended fully, carrying cricket-like creaks from rigging and a blanket of stars shimmering as if to replace the heat with hush. The surgeon released a final instruction, a collective sigh. Inhale the moon-cooled air, exhale the day's furnace. hammocks rocked in compliance, the quiet rhythmic as tide. And you, gentle listener, may let that same breath tide lap at your shore. Draw in the lunar calm. Release any scorch of thought left smoldering. Feel shade blossom behind closed eyes, salt balance within veins, and water ripple through dreams like polished mirrors, scattering gentle light. Here, beneath this chapter's awning of words, the sun can do no harm. Its heat remains a story already conquered, leaving you to drift in cool, replenishing sleep. The horizon lightens with promise as the prow turns eastward, guiding the battered vessel toward familiar harbors and the surgeon's long-anticipated reprieve. Dawn spills in pale mauve and rose, and the deck, scarred by storms and soothed by salves, feels softer beneath each footfall. He wakes before the first watch bell, inhaling the salt-sweet air that carries faint echoes of last night's lullabies and the distant clang of hoisted anchors. In the hush of early morning, he gathers his chosen tools, catgut, silver scalpels, a brass otoscope hand, pauses to trace their edges with a fingertip, acknowledging every nick and polish earned in service. Around him, hammocks sway empty now, having surrendered sleepers to the promise of land. He steps into the deck's light, voice low and measured, calling any crew who still bear aches or doubts. Come, let us walk the yard arm one last time, that your bodies and minds may match the ship in readiness for shore. His words ripple across wood and water alike, an invitation to union before final departure from the sea's ever-turning cradle. In gentle procession, the surgeon leads the crew through a final health muster, lining them beneath the mainmast where sunlight warms shoulder blades and lids. One by one, he takes their pulses at wrist and throat, then presses a slender stethoscope to chest and back, listening for the unobtrusive lull of repaired lungs and the steady tick of hearts made steady by care. Apprentices hover with notebook and quill, capturing readings in neat cursive. Pulse 60, breath.com. Color rosied beneath each name. They note how the carpenter's knee now bends without protest, how the powder monkey's gait flows once more like water slipping over pebbles, how the helmsman's wounded arm flexes in readiness for future sails. Between examinations, the surgeon dispenses small vials of lavender mint tincture for residual nightmares, and he mends the tiniest ragged edges of hemostat kit pouches, smoothing the leather flap until it glides without catch. Each meticulous gesture reassures bodies tired of vigilant watches, easing minds accustomed to plotting each symptom like a charted reef. Yet healing extends beyond flesh. Farewells often tug at the soul with sharper ache than any blade. To tend this, the surgeon convenes a circle on the quarterdeck at sunset, where the sea's glassy calm reflects molten copper skies. He invites each sailor to speak one memory of recovery and amputation surviving the saw's kiss. A fever's last tremor extinguished by citrus grog, a mental storm stilled by song, as names and moments drift from one to another, shimmering as fireflies caught in twilight. The crew dispels lingering dread through shared remembrance. The surgeon then passes a carved conch shell, its lip lined with copper, that each man holds to ear before offering it onward. Within, they hear the sea's eternal hush, a reminder that departure from ship also means return to the world of quiet harbors and awaiting hearths. In that ritual, grief and gratitude merge, birthing a collective serenity that rides the tide toward land. With bodies steadied and spirits loosed from sea-bound shadows, attention turns to the surgeon's sacred ledgers, the silent tomes that have chronicled every wound. every cure, every tremor of doubt and surge of triumph. He gathers the apprentices in his cabin, its walls redolent with parchment, oak gallon ink, and dried herb sachets pinned above a low lantern. There, he guides them through the art of concise handoff, summarizing case histories, highlighting potential relapses, annotating herbal remedies that blend native flora with land-based apothecaries. His voice is soft as he repeats each patient's story back to them, ensuring accuracy without sacrificing compassion. Together they bind the ledgers into a leather portfolio, lacing edges with catgut so it may hang at a local healer's elbow upon final disembarkation. That portfolio will become their compass ashore, lest any sailor's story vanish with the turning of tide, and the surgeon's final duty is to see knowledge sail safely onward. Next comes the delicate task of restoration, taking instruments once baptized in salt spray and blood, and returning them to gleaming purity. Under the midday sun, apprentices dip each scalpel and bone-handled saw into a barrel of fresh water infused with juniper berries, green walnuts, and a sliver of springwood pine. They scrub with brushes bound in hemp fibers, rinse in vinegary brine, then lay tools to dry on cedar planks beneath billowing sails repurposed as a drying canopy. The surgeon hovers, guiding strokes to remove stubborn tarnish, while preserving the fine hone on each blade's edge. He reminds his charges that cleanliness honors the lives saved and those yet to be saved. A well-maintained instrument is a vow kept. Finally, he wraps each tool in linen treated with lavender oil, tying bundles with cords braided from the garden gunport's living vines, an aromatic promise that every blade sleeps now in peace until next called upon. Before the ship slips below the final line of waves, the surgeon turns teacher once more, this time imparting self-care rituals for life ashore. He demonstrates lambskin salve, mixing rendered fat with powdered guaiacum calendula petals, and ground tamarind hulls into a balm potent against chafed hands and fractured confidence. Apprentices watch as he holds each palm aloft, notes calluses born from shipboard labor, and custom blends salves in small tins they lacquer and label with care, instructions in 3 languages. He instructs that every sailor carry a tin in their khitan anchor of habit to soothe both spirit and epidermis. Alongside, he teaches a sunrise breath routine. Stand barefoot as dawn's warmth touches skin. Inhale Durich air for 6 counts. Exhale with soft sigh for 8. Then rotate wrists and ankles with slow, deliberate circles. These practices, he insists, will tether them to the rhythms of daylight and promise steadiness long after the sea's sway fades from memory. As dusk softens into lavender dusk, the surgeon convenes a final botanical harvest from the floating infirmary's verdant shelves. He and apprentices wander among plantings of sage, fevergrass, hibiscus, and rosemary, carefully clipping sprigs and blossoms with sharp scissors, no more than could be used in a single month on land to press into paper packets stamped with recommended infusions. Some buds he dries gently between oak shavings. Others he vacuums into small glass vials for tincturing ashore. Each packet is sealed with beeswax and tied with ribbon-dyed indigo by the Portuguese woad the ship once carried. The ribbon's color signifies aid in absence, to be untied only when sore heart or body demands. He labels each with simple instructions: steep, sip, exhale, trusting that these words will carry his calm-spoken voice into cabins, cottages, and hospitals, where crew will read them by lamplight. Night deepens, and under lantern glow, the surgeon holds a final drill for his apprentices. the liaison to shore medics. He arranges a mock consultation beneath the quarterdeck awning, playing both doctor and patient as each apprentice practices. Translation of sea-bound ailments into land-translated diagnoses. One describes scurvy-scarred gums and residual malaise. Another outlines burn patterns from midday blaze and effective aloe leaf dressings. They role-play passporting their patient to port authorities, handing over the leather-bound portfolio and ensuring continuity of care across jurisdictional tides. Each scenario ends with a bow of respect, the mutual recognition that medicine, be it aboard a bark or within a brick hospital, is a shared covenant of trust. The surgeon applauds in hushed tones, confident that his lineage of healers will steward his work ashore. Finally, in the hush before watch ends, the surgeon takes one last solitary walk along the star-silvered rails. He pauses to run a hand along the cold metal of the anchor chain, an echo of first land docking, and closes his eyes to palmed memory, the scent of tar and chamomile, the echo of the deckside orchestra, the flicker of lantern pulses in Storm's heart. He breathes deeply, drawing salt-inged calm into every artery, then exhales a benediction that drifts across decks and into every sailor's dreams. May your shores be gentle, may your healing extend ashore as it did at sea. As the sea's hush blankets ship and soul alike, he steps below decks for the final time, lantern dimming to ember glow, and allows slumber to find him soft, certain, and pure as the promise of safe harbor awaiting beyond the dawn. The dawn light glimmers over the hull as land, at last, edges into view a low ribbon of green and terracotta, marking the boundary between open sea and settled world. Salt-stung eyes gaze eastward, scanning rooftops and palm fronds that rustle in a breeze softer than any found offshore. The surgeon stands at the rail, hand resting on the cool stanchion, inhaling the blended scents of coconut smoke and terracotta clay carried by the morning wind. Around him, the crew moves with hushed excitement. Coils of rope are stowed, hammocks are struck, and the decks shine beneath careful sweeps of sand and tar. Every footfall echoes differently now, less a metronome of rolling waves than the sure steps of a vessel stepping into stillness. In this threshold hour, the surgeon's voice carries gently across the wood. Steady hearts and open minds, foreshore greets us with new rhythms. His words tumble like pebbles into a still pond, setting ripples of anticipation in every chest as the ship slows toward anchorage. A local pilot boat slips alongside, its captain nodding with practiced respect as he offers a braided hemp rope to secure boat to quay. Apprentices gather atop the forecastle, coiling the pilot's line in precise spirals, while the surgeon descends the companionway to meet the harbor master, a tall man in white linen who observes each wrinkle of salt and shadow beneath the surgeon's eyes. With soft-spoken introductions, they exchange documents and surgical ledgers bound in indigo-dyed ribbon, case histories of fever, frost, and fracture that will guide shore healers through stitches half-sewn at sea. The harbor master's fingers trace the leather's grain, and he murmurs thanks in 3 languages, French, Spanish, and the surgeon's careful English, recognizing that these tomes bear more than data. They carry the trust of lives reclaimed from brine and blade. Outside, gulls wheel over timber and tide, an avian benediction as lines are tightened and wood murmurs its final welcome. Below deck, apprentices begin the delicate task of unrigging the floating infirmary, dismantling bamboo lattice and folding canvas awnings with ritual precision. Each element ton-treated boards, rustling palm frond panels, mosquito netting, scented with citronella from the garden chest, is carefully stowed or handed to dock workers who will repurpose them for local clinics and orphanages. The surgeon passes among them, offering quiet instructions on preserving the integrity of medicinal plants pressed in wax packets, reminding hands to treat every petal and seed as a fragment of the voyage's memory. In one corner, ivory-handled scalpels are laid to rest on fresh linen pads before slipping into portcullis chests bound with brass clasps. In another, glass phials of tincture are nestled into straw-lined crates. As each piece finds its destiny ashore, the surgeon acknowledges the closing of a chapter, even as the living vessel of care disperses into the town's heartbeat. Once the tools are secured, the surgeon summons the crew for a final blessing on deck, a ceremony as old as mariners themselves. He stands before the lowered mainsail, its canvas now white and clean, and invites each sailor to lay a sprig of rosemary or fever grass into a shallow basin of seawater. One by one they step forward, the boatswain, the cook, the apprentices, pressing fragrant herbs into the brine and whispering their own silent wishes for safe passage home. The surgeon dips his fingers in the scented water and flicks droplets overhead, chanting a soft incantation learned from the healers. Sea's mercy, grant us grounding, land's gifts, renew our spirits. As the last sprig surrenders to the basin, he tips it overboard, sending herbs adrift in rippling rings and offering to currents that bore them this far. The collective hush that follows feels like a tide turned inward, a shared vow that memory of sea's healing will remain alive on land. In the quay's shade, tables of woven palm fronds are spread with simple fare, salted fish, rice boiled in coconut milk, plantains caramelized in brown sugar, and bowls of cherries from the Caribbean that taste like bottled sun. Lanterns of colored glass hang from stout beams, their ochre glow promising warmth long after dusk. The crew gathers in loose circles, scarred limbs resting on sandaled feet, spoons lifting bowls in quiet toasts to survival and kinship. The surgeon moves among them, offering fragrant marrowbone broth drawn from last night's kettle, its steam carrying faint notes of saffron and cloven, antidote to sea-sweet exhaustion. As he passes each bowl, he speaks the same soft words. May this warmth bind body, may this spice bind memory, and listens to response murmurs that rise like gentle waves on a still shore. In these moments of communal nourishment, the boundary between ship and land dissolves, and care becomes a bridge spanning sea and earth. Evening deepens into a tapestry of violet and umber, and the surgeon leads his apprentices to a final orientation with the ports, healers, and midwives. In a whitewashed hall, scented with incense and citrus peel, he lays out the leather portfolio of ledgers, charts, and herbal packets upon a worn table of mahogany. Local practitioners lean close, reading case notes etched in the surgeon's looping hand. The K fever outbreak, the midnight tempest triage, the burn cooled by aloe and banana leaf. He pauses at each entry, reciting context and nuance, ensuring that every line, every symbol of pulse, breath, and sound translates into the language of shore medicine. Questions ripple through the group, and he answers with equal parts humility and expertise, weaving his soft-spoken narrative into their learning. When the last note is clarified and hands are shaken, the midwives present him with garlands of orange blossom, symbols of renewal and gratitude, laying each blossom around his neck in a wreath of welcome. Night's third watch finds the surgeon alone on the quay's edge, lanterns stowed so only moonlight glimmers on harborside water. He sits upon coiled rope, boots removed, feet dipping into gentle lapping tide. Each toe feels the grainy sand release cool relief. Each ebbing wave carries away tension born of months aboard. In this silent communion between flesh and sea, he reviews the voyage's arc, the first patch of rope burn, the wild frenzy of battle triage, the triumph of the chart of blood and breath, the conquest of heat and shadow. Soft tears of salt merge with brine beneath the surface, and he allows himself a final exhale so deep it lands in his bones. The world of land and water converges here, a seamless threshold he crosses with each breath until memory of motion becomes steady earth. Finally, he returns to the small lodging arranged for himself and apprentice's whitewashed walls, mildew-scented linens, jars of rosewater on wood planks. There, he gathers the apprentices around a low table strewn with empty cups and herbal sacks. By lantern glow, he offers them each a cup of moonless tea passion flower, chamomile, and cinnamon softened by honey, and encourages one last circle of sharing, reflections on lessons learned, fears faced, dreams kindled. They speak softly, voices thick with fatigue and wonder, and the surgeon nods, his own words measured and calm. You carry within you the hush of the sea, the pulse of healing. Let it guide you when waves of life rise high, as the hearth fire guttering in the corner hums its final whisper. He blesses them with a silent vow that their practice will always be shaped by compassion's compass, wherever their paths may lead. With the apprentices retired to their hammocks, the surgeon slips outside into the night's hush one last time. The harbor glitters with distant lanterns, and hulls drift in shadowed rows, sleeping beneath starfields free of wind. He closes his eyes, tilts his face to the soft salt air, and inhales deeply until the fullness of shore and sea settles inside. Then he exhales, a breath carrying all the voyage's memories, the creak of healed timbers, the hum of well-tuned lantern pulses, the tender hush of passing hands. In that exhale, he releases the surgeon's solitude and embraces the healer's home. Let that breath now guide your own. Gentle listener, breathe in the stillness. Breathe out the day's final tidand. Surrender to the calm harbor of sleep, awaiting your gentle dream.